You know what? It's killing me. All right. That, do that. All right. Now, let's see whether we got this going or not. Looks like it. All right. Fire, what's up, brother? Yeah, just give me a minute, man. I'm trying to get my freaking self half-assed turned around. What's up, Warsaw? Yeah, this thing happened today, man. I, of course, work. I couldn't cover part of, or couldn't cover it today, but yeah, another hearing, just another shit show from these politicians that think they rule our lives. And that's what we're going to be sharing. So this is kind of a pop up. I didn't have it planned. Actually, was going to be doing some other stuff for a little bit and was going to do this later, but now it just kind of worked out. So now we're going live. Well, shit, I forgot something out of the truck too. I have to go get it. Dealing with a coof again, second time. Sorry, brother. Hopefully, you get through it quick, man. If you've already had it once, you ought to have some antibodies that have built up that'll help you along. Hopefully, it won't be a big thing. I've known some people that have had it once. I've known some people that have had it a few times. As far as I know, I haven't even had it. I've had plenty of other shit, sinus infections and all kinds of crap. But yeah, see you right middle of the road with it then. So I know Crump's still going with Krisky. I think they're going to go for a little while. I'm going to give it just a couple of minutes and then fire this off. Get this hearing right. Trying to get everything freaking where we can watch it. Hopefully, again, hopefully this stream will go good. Hopefully with this computer, everything will play okay. Maybe that's what I have to do. Open it up there. We'll see. I'll see how this is going to work. I know I'm going to have to do this off a screen share since I didn't have time to download it and all that happy shit. So we're going to see how it works. Yeah, hopefully you don't end up with internal bleeding and all that shit going on again, man. Let's see. Guidelines. All right, I think I finally got everything set up. Like I said, some days nothing necessarily happens like you want. It's just one of those days. So, anyway, this happened today. This was the Democrats are still pushing this, wanting to treat gun violence as a community health deal, and just fucking stupid shit. Give me
is Sparta!
Hey, boys! Look what I got here!
Hey, where are the white women at?
Violence is a public health epidemic, plain and simple. In 2022, there were more than 48,000 firearm-related deaths in the United States. That's 132 Americans every day dying from gun violence. More than half of firearm-related deaths were suicides. More than 4 out of 10 were homicides. And guns are now the #1 cause of death among America's children and teenagers. Not auto accidents, not cancer, guns. I'm going to share a video that shows the devastation left in the wake of gun violence and provides a glimpse into heroic efforts to heal communities and prevent future violence. I'm going to warn the audience that the video is disturbing and may be upsetting to some if they wish to avert their eyes. Please play the video.
Foundations, community organizations, and corporations have all stepped up to support initiatives that holistically address the root causes of this cycle of violence.
I think reframing this as a public health crisis.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
think
I'm
this is a
an infectious
little
disease
emotional
specialist. Many of the
manipulation.
people in my field have actually turned to gun violence, recognizing that gun violence behaves like an infectious disease. It is contagious. Violence is passed on from person to person.
Collecting data, identifying trends, developing strategies to prevent harm, reducing risk, sharing these practices. This is how you combat an epidemic. It's worked in the past.
No, that.
We use the same public health approach to dramatically cut automobile fatalities. We still drive where we need to go, but we have seatbelts and speed limits that help us get there alive. Public health experts are already working to address gun violence in real time. Last year, Congress passed the bipartisan Safer Communities Act. I want to salute my
Plain
colleague,
reviews.
Senator Cornyn, who is here with us today, representing the minority. It took real courage to
Nice crack.
disagree
What's
on a
up,
lot of
brother?
issues, but at a time
Damn right, it's a
when
lot.
we needed to act, you did your best, and I thank you for that. It included $250 million in funding for community violence intervention and $250 million for states to provide comprehensive community mental health services. Let me give one example of the successful, innovative programs underway. In Chicago, I heard from doctors personally who were sick of treating gunshot victims on the operating table. They wanted to prevent the gruesome injuries from happening in the first place. So in 2018, I brought together the CEOs of the 10 largest hospitals serving Chicago.
No,
And
Durbin's
to understand what they were doing in the
he's
neighborhoods surrounding their hospitals. and
he'll
how
go
we
after
can do
anything
more.
to ban guns. Period.
We formed the
Oh,
Chicago HEAL Initiative, which has emerged as a national exemplar of how hospitals can collaborate and reach
And it's
outside
proved
their
many
borders
times
to
he
prevent
knows
gun
jack
violence.
shit about violence.
These hospitals have increased local hiring
gonna
by
be a running theme
84%
through
in
this
the
year.
last 4 years. They've opened 24 school-based health
Yeah, this
clinics to
happened
serve
today.
11,000 students and are training nearly 4,000 local students for careers in healthcare. Most importantly, these hospitals aren't just stitching up physical injuries. They're addressing the emotional scars of their patients. Through counseling and case management to prevent retaliation and promote successful recovery, just 2% of over 8,000 participating patients at the University of Chicago have returned to the hospital. Without these programs and this initiative, 45% of patients with a gunshot wound are likely to return within 5 years with another one. That is a stunning statistic. 45% within 5 years will return shot a second time.
Yes, because
Similar
there's
steps are
still
underway
proof
across
of
the
things
country to
that got
use
him
this
shot
strategy,
in the
which is
first
known as
place.
community violence intervention. CVI uses trusted community
Well, a
figures
lot of
to
that
engage
lag
with
time you
individuals
see in between
at high
shots is
risk
probably
of
because they're
perpetrating
serving
or being
time
victims
for
of
violent
violence.
crimes.
They work to interrupt acts of violence before they happen and connect people with treatment and tools that decrease the risk of future violence. It's time for us to build on this bipartisan Safer Communities Act and ongoing efforts that are working in red and blue states. And join together, surely we can find some common ground between parties to create real change for the American people when it comes to this public health crisis of gun violence. I now turn to Senator Cornyn.
Well, Warsaw, you're nicer than me to that. And remember,
Thank you,
Senator
Mr. Chairman.
Cornyn signed on to this Safe Streets Act. Horse
Just a few
shit.
months ago, the Democratic governor of New Mexico, Michelle Lujan Grisham, issued a, quote, public health emergency order to suspend the right to bear arms in Albuquerque and surrounding Bernalillo County. I think I pronounced that correctly. She was warned repeatedly by officials in her state that such a suspension violated the Constitution. A group of our colleagues here, including Senators Tillis, Graham, Kennedy, Blackburn, and Cotton, and I wrote to the Department of
Tactical
Justice
Flood,
to
what's up,
intervene
my
and
brother?
protect the constitutional rights of New Mexicans to carry a firearm outside of their home. Our request was consistent
Matt, what's
with
happening?
the Second Amendment and the court's jurisprudence, and I expect that the court of last resort will find the same.
Yeah, Matt, you're right.
But unfortunately, that doesn't mark the end of the road for this late.
All right. Understand, folks, we're at a stage in the game right now where there is no common ground in between those of us who believe in freedom and those of us who believe in government. There's no common ground there anymore. I love guys that want to, touch base and try to convince and stuff like that these days. And I will to a point sometimes. But the hardcore where the left is really gone, believe it or not, where a lot of you Republicans are sitting, there's no common ground with us anymore. And there really hasn't been for a very long time. You either believe in freedom or you don't. Hard line. Again, falling back to something I've said very many times in streams. as long as I don't wrongfully deprive someone else of life, liberty, or property, then the government shouldn't be involved in my life. Period. They shouldn't be able to control what I own, what I put in my own body, you name it. As long as I'm not wrongfully depriving someone else of life, liberty, or property. So there's no middle ground with these folks anymore. We've done middle ground since 1934, and all it gets us is another year or another 2 years where we get to fight for our rights, or another decade in the courts fighting laws that shouldn't exist in the first place. There's no common ground. None. When these people say, they want to negotiate, they don't want to negotiate. They want their win, and they want you to lose. That's all it is. Some people don't like that end of this conversation when it comes to our rights these days, but that's honestly the way it is. If you think it's any other way, I hate to break it to you, you're wrong. If it was about negotiating and give and take and things like that, then we would get rights back. We'd have machine guns back right now, because machine guns typically aren't used by law-abiding people to go out and commit crimes. Because by definition, we tend to be law-abiding. Oh, yeah, Night Strike, no doubt, dude. We got to fight tooth and nail to get every inch of ground we can get. We have to understand the fight we're in. These people do not care whether they win today, tomorrow, 10 years, 100 years from now, as long as they win. And we have to be that way. So we need politicians, which we're never going to get. I hate to break it to everybody. We need politicians that are going to be there to make the hard fights, who are going to pass bills and push bills that give us back our rights. And then let the left fight about it in the courts. Make them fight about it more in the courts. But that's not the way it works. Agorizer, what's up, my brother? All right, let's play some more of this. I got to run. I'm going to let this play, and I got to run.
Latest attack on what is a constitutional right.
Because
that's something some of our colleagues consistently overlook. And the fact is that a firearm in the hands of a law-abiding citizen is not a threat to public safety. Indeed, there's a story, I think it's in the Washington Post today, by Philip Bump, who points out that 52% of American households have a firearm in that household, 52%. Washington Democrats have unfortunately chosen to follow Governor Grisham's lead and are now using public health as a guise to address their concerns. I wish they had the same concerns about the number one cause of death for Americans between the age of 18 and 45, which is fentanyl poisoning. Fentanyl made from chemical precursors from China going to Mexico, made to look like relatively innocuous pharmaceuticals, which are then smuggled into the United States. And unfortunately, many young people end up consuming what they think is a relatively innocuous drug and die as a result of fentanyl poisoning. Well, we don't have to look far to see that examples of executive overreach that have relied on so-called public health emergencies. During the COVID-19 pandemic, too many politicians were quick to shut down houses of worship and church services while allowing other businesses and other organizations to operate. Here in Washington, D.C., for example, Mayor Muriel Bowser refused to allow the Capitol Hill Baptist Church to hold outdoor church services because of a public health emergency. The judge in that case found that the mayor had exceeded her authority and had substantially burdened the free exercise of religion. It's important to note that the application of these so-called public health precautions was not even-handed. While many politicians deemed it unsafe for businesses to operate or churchgoers to attend worship services, they seemed to have no problem with packed BLM riots, as in Black Lives Matter riots in the summer of 2020 that caused millions of dollars worth of damages. So we have a trust issue and a constitutional issue when we use the public health approach to attempt to strip away core constitutional rights. The other problem with the public health approach is that the most effective solution to firearm-related homicides and assault is effective criminal law enforcement. That means effective police, prosecutors, courts, and prisons. We know that these tools actually work. We know they work because we have historical data in order to prove it. As law enforcement efforts were stepped up in the early and mid 1990s, we saw dramatic declines in criminal violence of all kinds. One of the reasons for this is that the concentration of gun violence is among small numbers of the population. It's not the general population, it's a small percentage of the population where this phenomenon exists. In Washington, D.C., for example, in 2021, a study found that only 500 people were responsible for up to 70% of the gun violence in the district. In Boston, a 28-year-old study found that half of the city's homicides were committed by 1% of the population, involved with gangs primarily. A 2014 study showed a similar situation in Chicago. What all of this means, I believe, is that if you empower law enforcement to selectively investigate and prosecute repeat offenders, you can dramatically reduce the gun violence in a community where it's a problem. By removing the worst criminal elements from the community, everyone is safer. That's the original purpose of the Project Safe Neighborhoods program, which passed out of the Senate this year. That program focuses on investigating and prosecuting the most dangerous and violent criminals in our communities to ensure they do not continue to harm other people. And we've seen over the last
Oh yeah,
2+
this world's
decades,
so
it's had
freaking
an
broken,
overwhelming
Warsaw. It ain't even
success
funny
rate
anymore.
at reducing violent crime. Successful programs like Project Safe Neighborhoods require both resources and political will.
No,
You can't
Project Safe
simply
Neighborhoods
achieve
crap
safer
is
communities
not
by
going to do a
defunding the police,
damn
or
thing.
letting violent offenders out on bail, like unfortunately too many prosecutors have been willing to do in communities across our country. Today, violent crime is ravaging many of our communities, and the public is, of course, taking notice, as they must. Here in the District of Columbia, carjackings are up dramatically. And I have to believe that a lot of this has to do with the perception that there will not be.
Oh, I promise you guys, listening to this hearing, we could solve 85% or more of a lot of what they're calling so-called gun violence. We could stop that without depriving a single person of their life, liberty, or property. You have to take everything that the government's done for the last, say, 70 years. All right. I guess that was a little bit of an intermission. There went that rant. Let's see. Let's get back to where we were at. And that really did. That messed up a perfectly good rant that I was going to go on. And now I done lost my damn train of thought. So now we're back. But no, well, I know what it was. So you want to fix 85% or better of this so-called gun violence shit. Take everything that the government's done for the last 70 years or so that has been detrimental to the nuclear family and scrap it. Welfare, drug war, you name it. Everything that has negatively affected the nuclear family for the last 70 years, get rid of it and get back to letting the nuclear family thrive and, in fact, doing things that might make the nuclear family more attractive. Then you fix most of these issues. Then you're left with a very small amount of issues that fall outside of things caused by that lack of that nuclear family. Hey, we all need a good rant, man.
Consequences associated with committing such crimes
I'll
against innocent citizens, including members of the United States Congress. A recent Gallup poll showed that 63% of Americans describe the crime problem in the U.S. as either extremely serious or very serious. That's the highest level since this particular poll began in 2000. And 77% of Americans believe there is more crime today in the United States than there was just a year ago. Again, when we talk about the gun violence epidemic, it seems as though a substantial part of that debate is our current crime problem, which has spiked due to the left's soft on crime policies.
No, it's substantial to part of this
police
debate.
movement.
Should be the
Of course, we
policies
know
that
the
have
other
led to
side of the
this shit.
gun violence.
Y'all
issue
are
is
focused on
mental
everything
health.
else.
This is especially important when we conclude
Crack, Scout.
firearm-related suicides, as the chairman said. About 60% of the gun deaths in America are the result of a suicide.
Crack.
Someone taking
Yeah,
their own life.
if you wanted a panel
And
of
of course,
successful
we know that the
criminals to
Bipartisan
testify on
Safer
crime,
Communities Act, which we
our
passed,
government just
made the single
pick
largest
random out of
investment
the
in
fucking
community-based
phone book
mental
their
health
numbers,
care
and
in
you'll get the
American
best
history.
witnesses you could
A
possibly
good
get.
start. In
The mob ain't got
2023,
nothing
a
on our
survey
government.
from Mental Health America found that 21% of American adults have claimed symptoms of a mental illness. That's 50 million.
Yeah, I saw some of that,
Americans.
Warsaw.
A 2015 study published by the Annals of Epidemiology found mental illness is strongly associated with increased risk of suicide, which accounts, as I said, for more than half of the gun-related deaths in this
Because
country.
most mentally healthy people
Suicide
don't
is
fucking
a
shoot
mental health
themselves.
And we're
or
not
other
going to fix
people.
the issue by denying people their
least without
constitutional right
cause.
to keep and bear arms, at least among the
Oh,
general
our government
population.
puts the mob to shame.
Countries
Fire.
like Belgium, Japan, South Korea all have higher suicide rates than the United States, but don't have a Second Amendment. Mental health problems are also often involved in mass
I figured that
shootings,
too.
as
It
we know.
was crack.
In the wake of the Buffalo and Uvalde shootings, we looked at the profile of these mass shootings.
One of these
and
days, I'll
found
get
that
back to sleeping
many
on
of them
stream.
had serious underlying mental health problems, mental health issues that were unaddressed and untreated. Many of our colleagues, including Senator Tillis, Graham, Durbin, and Coons, and many others, worked together, as you've heard, to pass the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. I think that bill has already saved lives. I get regular updates of the success of that law as it deals with mental health and violence in our communities. But there are other parts of the bill that are working as well.
TLD
Since the
after
law was
bagel bites.
enacted in June of 2022, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, new criminal penalties and firearm trafficking had led to more than 100 new charges against dangerous cartel members and firearms traffickers. The enhanced juvenile
100. Hold on. Yeah, fuck you, dude. No, you don't get to skate on that one. 100 new charges against somebody. While the ATF is sitting here with their proposed rules and shit, where if I sell a gun to somebody and I dared make a profit off of it, all of a sudden I'm in the business of dealing firearms without an FFL, and my happy ass gets to go to fucking jail. It has always been illegal to sell someone a firearm in the commission of a crime. In other words, you know you are selling to people who are going to use this in a violent manner, or selling to known felons, or selling to known drug dealers, or anything like that. That shit's always been illegal. They've always been at a charge off of it. They've always been able to put people in jail over it. All this other shit does is put your ass and my ass on the hook if we have the nerve to sell a gun without asking the government's fucking permission. And I'd like to punch him dead in his goddamn face for voting for that stupid shit, because he's a moron. Back to our regularly scheduled programming.
Criminal records check alone has stopped 400 transactions of people who would ordinarily flunk a background check were they an adult and you only check their adult mental health and criminal history. But now, because we have an enhanced check that include juvenile records, 400 transactions have been stopped, while 98.5% of the background check system is unaffected. This, of course, builds on the positive changes that came from a bill we called Fix NICS, the National Instant Criminal Background Check Act, which was signed into law by President Trump in 2018. That law has led to the uploading of millions of new records into the FBI's National Instant Criminal Background Check database to prevent those who are already legally prohibited from possessing a firearm under existing law from obtaining one. All this was done, both Fix NICS and the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, in a bipartisan way without infringing the rights of law-abiding citizens.
Yeah, but you'll put us in jail for
point is
selling
we
our
can
own
find
property
ways
now.
to come
you
together.
fucking numbnuts.
To get things done, but using public health authorities as a blanket excuse to strip away constitutional rights, or framing gun violence as an epidemic divides us more than it unites us. And it really kind of misses the point. These are not autonomously fired weapons. They involve human agency. And as we've seen, when we focus on the humans, we can have a very positive impact. So I hope we look at the entire picture of gun violence, which includes focusing on repetitive acts of violence by a small percentage of our community.
I understand what you're saying there,
focusing on
Warsaw.
mental
That kind of
diagnosis
grates
and
my
treatment.
nerves.
And finding ways that we can address gun violence like we did in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Again, all without infringing on the rights of law-abiding citizens. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. And you've raised some very important issues like fentanyl, which we've had hearings in this committee about the issue of narcotics and what's happening to America. President Biden recently raised this issue with the leader of China. I hope that it leads to something positive and diminishing the supply on that
You
side
think
of it.
Biden walking up to
You
Xi
raised the issue
Jinping
of,
and going, "Hey,
freedom of
quit
religion,
selling
which
the
is important to
cartels
all of us, and is
precursors for
discussed
fentanyl"?
frequently in this committee.
You think that's stopping
You
shit?
talked about funding the police. I believe that funding the police is critical. I've never said otherwise. I hope that on some of the spending bills that our Republican friends will start voting for them when they find funding for the police included. That should be a bipartisan effort. But the one thing that you
No,
don't
Biden ain't
acknowledge
doing
and we
shit.
disagree on is the fact that the
Besides
United
eating
States
Jell-O
of
and
America is unique
fucking the
among
world
nations.
over.
Unique among nations. There is no other country, developed economy
And
in
listen to
this
this
world
dumbass fucking
where the
shit
number
he's
one
about.
cause of death among children and teenagers is guns, period. We are a unique nation in many ways, but this is something we shouldn't take pride in. And to address it at this hearing, I think is appropriate and timely. The white coats that are represented in the audience here are men and women who've given their life to medicine and have to
I
face
do
the
not
products
care
of
about
these
those
violent
white
actions
coats'
and try to keep these poor
opinions,
people alive.
not
another day.
whatsoever.
And yet we know that doing nothing means that 45% of them are going to return with another gunshot wound. What is wrong with this picture? Even if it is a limited number of people who are engaged in it, are we going to turn our back on the fact that 122
Sam, what's up, my
Americans
brother?
die every single day by gun wounds? That is a fact in our country and no other country. When it comes to mental illness, other countries face mental illness every day as well. but they don't turn to guns or wanton violence as an alternative in the way they do in the United States. That is entirely unique to our country.
No, it's not unique.
Before
to
we
our
return
country.
to our witnesses, let me briefly lay out the mechanics. After I swear the witnesses in, they'll have 5 minutes each to provide an opening
Good old
statement, and then a
Dickie
round
Durbin.
of questions where each senator will have 5 minutes to ask. We welcome 5 witnesses, and I'm going to introduce the majority witnesses. Our first witness is Dr. Megan
Let's see.
Branny.
There's Dick
Dr. Branny is
Durbin, then
the
there's
Dean of
Dick
the Yale School
Blumenthal.
of Public Health, board
You
certified
put them in the
emergency
room.
physician and violence prevention researcher.
Do you get a circle
She's been
jerk?
a leading national voice for addressing
You
firearm
have 2 dicks
injuries as public health problem for well over 10 years. Thank
occupying
you.
the same
We're
plane.
joined as well by Dr. Franklin
Same
Cozy
space.
Gay. Dr. Cozy Gay is Director of
Just
Violence
after.
Recovery Program at the University of Chicago Medicine, which helps trauma patients and their families with crisis intervention and social service. In 5 years, the program has grown 800%, serving over 8,000
Man, Sam, man, I'm
participants.
probably better than I
It employs
deserve,
more than
but
20 specialists
I'm
who
here.
are themselves either gun violence
Hopefully you
survivors
feel
or
better.
family members of gun violence victims. Our final majority witness is Vaughn Bryant. Mr. Bryant's the Executive Director of Metropolitan Peace Initiatives, which is based in Chicago. MPI focuses on community violence intervention by providing trauma-informed behavioral health service, building a citywide network of outreach workers, and enhancing community capacity to reduce violence. I now turn the floor over to Senator Cornyn to introduce the minority witnesses.
Crack Scout?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
is a good
Ms.
idea.
Swerer- Amy Swerer is a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Her areas of scholarship include the
For you
Second
guys
Amendment,
don't follow
overcriminalization,
Amy, Amy kicks ass.
school safety, and the intersection of
And
mental
Amy
health.
has to be
and
getting
gun
tired of
violence.
these fucking
She runs
hearings.
Heritage's
God
Defense
knows.
Gun Use Database and is the primary author of Heritage's recent ebook, The Essential Second Amendment. She earned her JD and undergraduate degrees from the University of Nebraska. Mr. Stephen Cook, who's been a frequent witness here before the committee, served with the Department of Justice for 33 years, including 30 years as a federal prosecutor in the Eastern District of Tennessee. Between 2017 and 2019, he served as Associate Deputy Attorney General and Director of Law Enforcement Affairs. In that capacity, he led 2 of DOJ's priority programs, violent crime reduction and strengthening the DOJ's relationship with state and local law enforcement. Before joining the DOJ, Mr. Cook worked as a police officer for 7 years. Presently, Mr. Cook serves as a general counsel for both the Major Cities Chiefs Association and the Major County Sheriffs of America. And he also serves as outside counsel for the Federal Law Enforcement.
Well, I love how they
Officers
mention some of these
Association.
organizations.
Thank you.
Thank
Major
you, Senator. I
chiefs
ask the
of
witnesses to
police
please
and all
stand
this
as
shit.
sworn.
It's a bunch of elected ass officials.
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Dr. Franklin Cozy Gay is first.
Chairman Durman, Senator Cornyn, and respected committee members, I'm deeply grateful to have the opportunity today to share a personal story that underscores the vital violence recovery program. My name, Dr. Franklin Cozy Gay, the director of this hospital-based violence intervention program. As was highlighted today, gun violence is an agonizing crisis plaguing our nation, causing immeasurable
It
pain and
doesn't plague
suffering.
our nation. It
However, there are
plagues, for the
proactive
most
ways we
part,
can respond to get in
very
front of the
few
problem,
and select
and that
areas
through a collaborative
in our
and
nation.
coordinated approach, a public health prevention and intervention approach, many of our facets of our society can come together to be a
Clint,
part of the solution
What's up, my
and
brother?
hospital-based violence intervention program
It's all
are
good, man. Hopefully
core
things
to
good with you and
solving
yours.
this complex puzzle. What is the Violence Recovery Program? It is a hospital-based violence intervention program that consists of highly trained paraprofessionals, many who are impacted themselves as survivors of violence, who often come from the community.
Oh, yeah,
They are
dude,
housed in the
this-
hospital 24/7.
This definitely could have been the share of the
365
pain
days a
stream.
year. They provide crisis intervention support while the patient is there, and that continues through a coordinated approach with our spiritual care team, social work, child life specialists, mental health specialists, our clinicians in the hospital, as well as Healing Hurt People Chicago. Our specialists use intensive long-term case management, partnering with community violence interventionists in the community that have special relationships that are core to our approach for comprehensive
Yeah, what
recovery
was that dude
and
from
preventing
that,
re-injury.
violence intervention
Today,
group
I
not
want to
too long
bring the
back
human
got
side
busted
of our
for
efforts
violence
through a
and
story that has
selling
touched my
guns for
heart
gangs
and captured
shit?
our collaborative and coordinated approach and why that approach is so critical. I want to share a story of a 12-year-old patient who arrived at our trauma center with a gunshot wound to the left thigh. At that moment, our team moved in swiftly in action within the hospital walls, not just as healthcare providers, but as compassionate individuals eager to make a difference. We provided practical assistance, providing a phone charger, a blanket, water, but we also consulted with our child life specialists to provide a comforting presence. As we delved deeper into the interpersonal risk assessments, it became painfully clear that this young child was exceptionally high risk for re-injury after being discharged. His family's safety was also in jeopardy. Through this juncture, it demanded more than
Notice
just
he
medical
mentions
attention.
that, but he
We
doesn't
connected with
say why
shelters,
and he doesn't say
securing
how.
temporary emergency funding resources to meet the family's immediate needs. Our support continued, understanding that we needed to provide wraparound services to address the holistic needs around
Why was a
resiliency
12-year-old
and
shot in the
recovery
leg?
from
Well,
trauma.
because
Our
gangs
collaboration
recruit
extended
12,
with our
13,
internal recovery
14,
and empowerment after
16-year-olds to
community
do the
trauma,
shooting
mental health clinicians who provided therapeutic
so
sessions
that their
for our
older gang
survivors
members
and
don't
their
go to
families.
prison for
We
long
contacted
amounts of
our
time.
program partner, Healing Her People, who connected with patients within the trauma intervention specialists to provide this
You want to solve a
long-term case
problem? Put the
management.
dad in the house.
Regular
that will
calls,
beat
regular
that kid's
home
ass
visits
when that
were
kid is
conducted
not
with the
home by the
patient
time
and
the
his
fucking
mother,
street
providing
lights go out.
emotional, psychological support, and with practical help such as emergency transportation, counseling, and community-based activities. I regret to share that that family's home was rattled with gunshots. Their home was destroyed in a retaliation event. However, we secured transitional shelter in Indiana, our neighboring state, for 10 days. And after that, our team continued until we were able to establish a permanent home in a neighboring state. Collaborating with our street outreach partners that will be represented here by Mr. Bryant, we made sure that those leaders that have existing relationships with the individuals that are causing harm would agree to create a non-aggression agreement to
Individuals that
prevent
are causing
further
harm.
violence
In
from
other
happening.
words,
That
going
agreement
to
has
gang
been
members
with-
and
has
begging
been
them, hey,
held up
please
for
don't
this entire
shoot
time.
each other.
This example is underscored in regarding the complexity of the work that we're doing. One thing that I want to highlight is the role that our Chicago Police Department have with our community violence interventionists. One of my proudest moments in doing this work is hearing our Chicago police officers commend CVI, community violence interventionists, for doing work, for establishing peace in the community and establishing non-aggression agreements. I'm equally proud when I hear our community violence interventionists
Look,
commend the police officers
doesn't
for
have to be
treating residents and those that are
religious. It
causing
doesn't
harm
have to
with
be
respect and dignity.
Catholic or Jewish
Since
or
May
anything
19,
else.
2018,
If
excuse
you
me, the
have a
Violence Recovery Program has
family with
engaged
a
over
mom
9,000
and a
patients.
dad who give
85%
kids
of them have been
structure,
African American, 70% of them have been victims of
85 to
gunshot wounds,
90% of this shit
81%
goes away.
males, 86 were involved in
But
community
where we're at
violence.
now is
60%
most
between the ages of
families
22 and 40.
with
Impressively, our program
situations like
has
this going on,
accepted 89%
the
of the
dad's
patients
not
have
there,
accepted
the mom's
services
not
through
there,
this
the
work,
kid's on the
resulting
street
in a
being raised
re-injury
by
rate
his
of
buddies,
2.1%.
running
While this
gangs,
outcome speaks to
selling
their
dope.
terrific
That's
work,
where most of this shit
re-injury
comes
rate is
from.
only at the program level. Thanks to Senator Durbin's HEAL initiative, we're
So
working
if
to
you want to
establish
stop most
data
of this
sharing
shit,
agreements with all of the
unfuck the
10
nuclear
hospitals that are
family.
part of that initiative. As we
Where
continue
mom and
to
dad are in
experience
the
the impact
same
of this
house,
gun violence,
they're able to
it is
make it
clear that this
on
is a
a
persistent
single
public
income
health
without having to
crisis.
work 37
However,
fucking
our
jobs
response to be proactive needs to happen
and
through a
allow parents to raise their
collaborative
kids.
and
How
coordinated
about in
approach.
fucking our education system
Hospital-based
and telling
programs
kids
are very
from
important, like
the
our violence
word
recovery
go,
program, to play
everything's not about you and
perfect
your
role,
feelings.
a critical role in establishing solutions towards this complex.
These are
puzzle.
goals
Thank
you
very
have to
much.
meet. If you don't meet these goals, you fail.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Stephen Cook.
Good morning.
No, everything's
Chairman,
about your feelings.
Durbin,
Everything's about you.
Ranking
No one
Member
understands you.
Members of the committee, thank you very much for the
Do
opportunity.
you
to
wonder why
appear
some
before you
fucking
today.
little
And
shitbag
thank you,
will
Senator
go out
Cornyn,
there
for that
and
introduction.
go shoot
I am
multiple people
serving in the
to
capacities that you
inflict his
described,
pain
but I am
on
here
others?
representing the views that I'm going to express are the views of my own. And I'd like to just begin with one single observation, and it's this. What this committee does or does not do will have a profound impact on violent crime in our country.
No, it
I'm
won't.
convinced of this because I was a federal prosecutor when our nation
Unless
faced
you
very
say a
similar
profound
problems in the
effect on crime
mid-1980s.
is they basically
Crime was
make
skyrocketing.
more of it.
Congress responded, and it responded with legislative programs and statutes that allowed federal prosecutors to team up with their state and local law enforcement partners and to go after the most violent criminals in our country. The program worked. Violent crime began to turn around by 1991 as we continued to fill our prisons with violent offenders from across the country. Over the
Hold
next
on.
2 decades,
This
and
is
by
the
2014,
perfect, just about the
violent crime
perfect
had been
place.
cut.
So this dude's getting into what happened with the 90-something crime bill. Some stuff happened a little earlier back in the 80s, where you were starting to see the crack epidemic, and violent crime just went through the roof. Around that time was the first time where I started hearing about Bloods and Crips and these gang wars and all this shit that was going on. And yeah, there were people getting planted on the fucking regular when that hit. But and as much as I don't like mandatory minimums and all the other bullshit that went along with that, it should have been handled much more sensibly by people who, I don't know, have some fucking sense. We did find out that if you take really violent people and you put them in prison where they can no longer and basically perpetuate their violence on innocent people, well, then you don't have the crime stats that you end up with when you allow those same people to stay on the streets. Yeah, we're still getting back to that whole don't wrongfully deprive someone of life, liberty, or property. Now, there are laws in there, there are mandatory minimums in there that were absolutely insane. It's fucking stupid. It wound up taking people who may have been in the system at one point and then rolled out of the system to be normal people and put them in an express lane just to stay in the system. Because that shit does happen. Once you're in the system, you're stuck until you can pull your nuts out of that vice. And that's what happened to people. Now, what I wanted to show you guys, just for a little fun, when we talk about penitentiaries, is we're going to look at this.
I'm not lying. They bust motherfuckers in.
Because
And I
he'd
was
be
up there,
fucking
I
just
looked at all the
crucified.
brothers and it made my heart ache. You know, it's all these beautiful black men in the joint. God damn, warriors should be out there helping the masses. And I felt that way. I was real naive, right? In 6 weeks I was up there. I talked to the brothers, you know, and I talked to them. Thank God we got penitentiaries.
The brother ain't lying. I will tell you right now, there are people in prison right now who do not deserve to be in prison at all. And they're there for multiple things, all stuff that could be handled within treatment and a bunch of other stuff. And then a lot of them are there just for absolute fucking horseshit laws, CRS, a bunch of others. They're for these thou shalt not crimes from the government. But there are people who deserve to be in prison. There are people who deserve to be in prison and never see the motherfucking light of day. Child molesters, actual rapists, people who murder innocent people for nothing other than the fact that they decided that person needed to die or they wanted that person's shit more than they wanted that person breathing. Yes, there are people who deserve to absolutely be in prison. Do we need all the laws that we have right now? Oh, fuck no. Yeah, state mental hospitals could be cruel. But you know what? Instead of scrapping the whole fucking state mental health system, because some were cruel, you could have taken the ones that were cruel and brought them to a level where they weren't cruel. And then kept people who are actually mentally ill and need treatment in facilities to treat them versus putting them in with Gen Pop in prisons to where those people either become massively worse in their psychosis that they're suffering from and more violent, or they just get destroyed by people who manipulate them and use them. And yeah, it's some crazy shit some days, guys. Yeah, Barton. Yeah, no, you're 100% right, man. And I realized you were being sarcastic. But I had to jump on that one too, because, you know, we did have it at one point. We did have a justice system and a mental health system. And sometimes they met in the middle and there were branches and people went in different directions for mental health or for actual justice. That's not what we've had for a very long time now. Now we just have a legal system and fuck all for the mental health system. Let's get back to this.
In half.
Give me a sec, guys. I'll be right back.
Then in 2015, we began to see a rise and an increase in violent crime. To those of us who were participants in the system, this was no surprise because we had watched as the federal criminal justice system was incrementally weakened by events. This morning, I'd like to focus on 4 of those events. First, DOJ policy handcuffing federal prosecutors, beginning with the Attorney General Holder's memo in 2010, and now followed up by Attorney General Garland's memo to federal prosecutors. Federal prosecutors have been ordered not to charge offenders, especially drug traffickers, with the most serious crimes they commit. As a result, the front end of our criminal justice system has been weakened. Second, in a series of opinions by the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court has significantly narrowed the reach of key statutory provisions designed to take violent offenders off the street. Among the statutes narrowed has been the Armed Career Criminal Act. Attempts have been made to pass legislation by Congress to correct these narrowing effects, but those statutory provisions have not passed. Third, the steady drumbeat of anti-police rhetoric premised on baseless allegations that law enforcement officers across the country are racist. These are the men and women who are the backbone of our criminal justice system. Several studies have determined that the anti-police rhetoric has caused depolicing, which in turn has reduced arrests and undermined both federal and state criminal justice systems.
My shot back up and running. That's a plan.
The fourth item I'd like to address is the finality of the federal criminal justice system and the fact that it has been completely gutted. The Sentencing Reform Act of 1984 allowed, through a provision called the most commonly known as the Compassionate Release Program, it authorized the Bureau of Prisons to file a motion with the sentencing court for a prisoner's early release for, and this language is important, extraordinary and compelling reasons. Typically, those motions were limited to acts such as, or incidents such as, where a prisoner had a fatal disease and the Bureau of Prisons filed for early release under those provisions about 24 times a year. In 2018, Congress changed the procedure, but not the applicable standard, by permitting defendants to file motions for compassionate release. Although the common meaning of extraordinary and compelling reasons, the statutory definition or the statutory language suggests a very narrow, limited circumstances, the courts have taken a much broader approach and a much more expansive view of their authority. By 2019, between 2019 and today, they have granted thousands of early release motions. Recently released statistics have shown that some inmates have filed numerous motions and collectively in 1 month alone filed 2,000 motions, and in some months 20% of those motions were granted. And it gets worse. In April, the Sentencing Commission, in a 4-3 vote, promulgated a further definition or a further reading of extraordinary and compelling grounds for early release. That broader definition included, among other things, allowing courts to consider changes in the law not made retroactive by Congress.
So
Collectively, the actions by the Sentencing Commission and the expansive court readings have resulted in a systemic.
here's the deal with something he's talking about right there. Talking about compassionate release, exceptional circumstances. And then he mentions when a law's changed. And here's one thing that really, really pisses me off is you can be in jail for decades for a law that was unconstitutional on its face. And when it gets shot down by the Supreme Court, guess where your ass is still at? You are still in jail unless the Supreme Court decides, I guess, DOJ, hey, this is retroactive and we were wrong. And then they may let you out of jail, but you're not getting your goddamn life back, even though they fucked you over completely. Vanessa Kitty, what's up, sis? So, really, really and truly, a lot of our legal code, probably the vast majority of our legal code, could be and should be completely fucking scrapped. And again, we should get back to the absolute basics of things. As long as I don't wrongfully deprive someone else of life, liberty, or property, then the government shouldn't be involved in my life. Now, if I go out and rape somebody, that is wrongfully depriving them of their liberty. If I molest a child, that's wrongfully depriving them of life and liberty. If I go out and rob somebody just to take their shit, that is wrongfully depriving them of their property. If I murder somebody, that is wrongfully depriving them of their life. These are all laws that make sense. Not you get to go to jail for 10 years because you have this piece of pipe that may or may not be threaded on both ends and could or could not be fitted to a gun to make this. Fuck off with that shit. Sorry, another rant. Been a while. Had to go and let that fly.
Structural change to our criminal justice system without congressional authorization or directive, and it has removed any finality in sentencing by allowing prisoners to file an unlimited number of motions relitigating their sentences endlessly. I see my time has expired. I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Mr. Bryant.
Good morning, Chairman Durman, Senator Cornyn, and members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. My name is Vaughn Bryant. I'm an executive director of Metropolitan Peace Initiatives, also known as MPI, a division of Metropolitan Family Services. I come to this work growing up in Detroit, Michigan. I'm a son of a Detroit police officer, and growing up, all of the sports I played were coached by police officers. I went on to become a fourth-round draft pick by the Detroit Lions in 1994, and I've spent half of my professional career serving the community. MPI coordinates, supports, and sustains a cross-agency community safety infrastructure made up of local community-based organizations rooted in neighborhoods hardest hit by gun violence in the city of Chicago. For the first time in Chicago's history, organizations with proven CVI outcomes across the city's geographies have come together to build a civilian infrastructure dedicated to preventing violence, delivering a comprehensive set of services to heal communities at highest risk for violence, and providing opportunities for individual rehabilitation. In 2015, Chicago endured the Laquan McDonald saga. In 2016, we saw 762 individuals killed by guns and 4,580 individuals shot, increases of 58% and 47% respectively. That led to a group of local leaders establishing Communities Partnering for Peace, or CP4P. Convened by MPI, we began to partner with 8 organizations working in 9 communities across the city of Chicago. Today, that coalition includes 13 partner agencies active in 27 Chicago communities. The program targets individuals most at risk for perpetrating gun violence or becoming
because
a victim.
they know the trigger.
Key services include street outreach, engaging individuals at the high likelihood of shooting or being shot, case management services to address social determinants of health, victim services to provide supports and safety planning for victims of gun violence, and community-based events aimed at building community safety and solidarity known as Light in the Night. We administer the Metropolitan Peace Academy, a multidisciplinary platform that
all these
trains,
fucking
professionalizes,
slogans.
and strengthens the field of street outreach and community violence intervention.
All of them.
The MPA features a
But you
curriculum
know who the
that is
trigger pullers
18
are.
weeks,
You know who the
140
gangs
hours,
are. You know who the gang
144
members
hours
are.
of
You know who
intensive
their
curriculum
recruiters are.
shaped and taught by street outreach workers,
And you know
subject
good and
matter-
damn well if
subject
there
matter
was a
experts, and is
nuclear
guided by
family there with a
14
mother and a
professional
father, that
standards.
kid wouldn't be out in that
MPI's
situation.
model also
But
includes
fuck all
behavioral
that.
health,
Keep supporting
workforce
policies
development,
that cause this shit in the
civil
first
legal
place.
aid, and
They
organizational
try
capacity
talking around
building.
the ass end of it.
In addition, MPI partners with Southland Resilience Initiative to strengthen and empower, also known as Southland Rise, a collaborative of the University of Chicago Medical Center and Advocate Christ Medical Center, formed in response to the Chicago Hill Initiative, launched by Senator Dick Durbin. It urges healthcare providers to bolster their efforts to
Anytime your
reduce gun
government
violence
launches an
and
initiative,
address healthcare needs
expect the
associated with
exact
violence
fucking
recovery.
opposite.
Southland Rise was
what they
created
say
to
is gonna
strengthen
happen.
collaboration between hospitals and street outreach organizations with the goal of improving trauma-informed care and support for gun violence survivors and their families on the Chicago South Side and South suburbs. The MPI, along with the two hospitals, together developed a two 4-day trainings, cross trainings that began together brought together the perspectives and knowledge of both street outreach and hospital frontline staff. We completed our first cohort in June and began our next one in February 22. Since starting CP4P in 2017, members
You
of
want to know who's
organizations have
stopping
provided
gun
over
violence
200
in places like
200,000 direct service
Chirac and all
to direct
these other
services
places like that.
to
People like
5,500
Tony Simon who are
participants,
teaching
most
people how to
acutely at
defend
risk of gun
themselves.
violence. Leading research by Northwestern's Center for Neighborhood Engaged
Jersey,
Research
all the
and
places,
Science
man.
estimates that between July 2017 and December 2021, a time of rising crime in Chicago and the country, communities where CP4P was operating saw statistically significant and favorable changes of rates of homicide and nonviolent shootings compared to areas without CP4P. CP4P's work resulted in 383 fewer homicides and non-fatal shootings than would have been expected without CP4P. I want to go now to the importance of federal funding for this work.
Yeah, man.
It has a national
100%.
impact. Gun violence is a national
Where that
epidemic.
money goes.
We can address root causes for systemic issues like poverty, inequity, and inequality, and lack of educational and employment opportunities. And giving a resource allocation can create
Yeah, bro.
standards of
What's
practice
up, brother?
across the country that are important for this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bryan. Amy Swear.
All right, we got to listen. I
Chairman
was going to
Durbin,
smash on
Member
some shit. We
Cornyn,
got to
and
listen to Amy.
distinguished senators. My name is Amy Swearer. I'm a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Ed Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. Here we are, once again, holding a congressional hearing on gun violence. This time, the chosen lens is that of public health. Despite the slightly different
Damn,
title,
Gabber,
it's
you shitting
effectively
me.
the same hearing as the last several gun hearings to which I've been called to testify. To be completely honest, I don't have much to say that's different.
No,
from what
Gabber,
I've said
don't
in my
ride by his
previous
house.
testimonies.
Turn that shit over to the
Believe me, I'm
fucking
not being
cops
flippant.
right
It's
there.
just that using a public health lens hasn't changed the discussion. Put aside that the end goal of many of those pushing
Yeah,
the public
just
health
turn his
framing
ass in,
is
Gabber,
often
all
either
the
to use
fucking day.
crisis language as an end run around the Constitution or to
And then
pathologize
you'll
the
see
right
whether
to
your
keep and
police
bear
department's
arms.
actually on
Put
point.
aside
'Cause
too
if
that
they
the
want to
public
bust
health
him, they're
lens is
probably
not
good.
particularly useful
say,
for
"Fuck it."
understanding and addressing
Well,
a problem
yeah.
that stems at its core not so much from a lack of insight into how violence affects health as from a lack of adequately enforcing criminal laws and utilizing existing mental health frameworks. If we take the issue of gun violence seriously from a public health perspective, none of the problems or solutions have changed. A public health
Amy
framework
is
doesn't change,
always
for
on
instance,
point.
the fact that most gun crimes are perpetrated not by
I'd
ordinary
really
lawful
like
gun
to
owners,
interview her.
but by a small subset of repeat offenders
Need to
who are
try to
already prohibited from owning
Reach out
guns.
some feelers.
It's still the case that if our policing, bail, and prosecutorial policies immediately spit these repeat violent offenders back into the community without pursuing criminal prosecution or punishment, they will predictably keep committing
What would
violent
be a real
crimes.
kick would be to have
A public
Amy
health
and
lens doesn't
Brooke
change the fact that most gun deaths are suicides,
on the live
but
stream.
half of suicides
together.
are carried out with something other than a firearm.
There's no way I can be
Pathologizing a
as calm as
specific
these
weapon
two.
remains far less
No way.
useful than talking about
way.
all lethal means during a personal crisis and dealing with
There's
hard
not
underlying
enough
truths about the
Xanax
nationwide
on
mental
this
health
planet.
crisis. It certainly doesn't change the fact that most of the gun control restrictions commonly proposed to deal with
Yeah, you
criminal
got to be
violence and
careful with that shit,
suicide,
Gabber. But
things
if
like
you
assault
got all
weapons
that
bans, magazine
information, man,
capacity
turn that shit in
restrictions,
and let it
punitive
ride.
public carry laws, and so on, are not even remotely designed to meaningfully address any major factors underlying crime or suicide. And a public health lens doesn't fix the constitutional or practical concerns about implementing these policies, nor does it erase the fundamental importance of the right to keep and bear arms to the natural right of self-defense. And so my proposals for how Congress should move forward may sound pretty familiar. Among other things that I've outlined in my 35 pages of written submission, Congress can and should pursue the following. First, Congress can start right here in Washington, D.C., where the D.C. City Council's reform efforts have created a crime tsunami under which the district's residents are currently drowning. Congress should exercise its plenary authority and pass a modern, comprehensive criminal code for the district, including a mandatory sentencing scheme for the Superior Court judges. It should strip the D.C. Office of Attorney General of the authority to prosecute all crimes and give that to the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office.
That's
It should
one thing
federalize
that
the
the
DC
fucking
crime
Fed
lab and
government
give that to
does
the
have
FBI.
control over.
Second, Congress can and should rein in federal agencies like
Oh,
ATF
yeah.
when they shift
Warsaw
their
Amy
time and
fucking
attention
rocks,
to overregulating peaceable citizens instead of targeting violent criminals who actually threaten public safety. Third, Congress can compel the military branches to better share with civilian authorities all relevant information about service members who clearly pose a danger to themselves or their communities. Last month's shooting by a mentally ill Army reservist in Lewiston, Maine, was not the first time the military's failure to share such information resulted in preventable tragedy. Congress can ensure that it is the last. Fourth, instead of spending so much time pathologizing and demonizing specific mechanisms of violence, Congress can turn its attention toward promoting economic growth and easing crushing inflation rates. No, that's not nearly as sexy as calling for an assault weapons ban, but reducing economic stress,
Amy
poverty,
is
and
on
family
point
instability
as
lowers a
always.
person's overall risk of suicide far more than requiring his or her rifle to be featureless. Senators, if today is an average day, by the time we finish this hearing in about 3 hours,
Yeah.
roughly 8 Americans will have
I
been
got you
murdered,
there, War.
about twice as many will have killed themselves, and countless others will have been violently victimized. Much of that violence will involve firearms. This is antithetical to human flourishing, to the rule of law, and to civil society. It's a problem worth understanding accurately and addressing meaningfully. And so I am happy to come back and repeat the same testimony as many times as you ask me to. And I will explain the same potential courses of action as often as it takes for Congress to do not just something, but the right things. I once again look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Swear. Dr. Brandy.
Chair Durbin, Senator Cornyn, and members of the committee, thank you for conducting this hearing and recognizing gun violence as a health crisis. I am a board-certified emergency physician and dean of the Yale School of Public Health. I've spent nearly 20 years working as an emergency physician in a top-tier trauma center. Here in the US, treating firearm injuries is a routine part of emergency medicine. During our training, we learn how to identify who must go right to an operating room, how to crack the chest of someone who's bleeding out, and how to notify family members of a death.
You learn that.
While in
for
training,
fucking
though, we
blood
rarely,
loss.
if ever, learn to
What's
ask
your point?
what could be done to prevent a gunshot wound in the first place. That changed for me about 15 years ago, after I cared for a young man, the son of a first responder, who had shot himself with his parents' firearm. He was the first patient I'd cared for who had intentionally shot himself. I couldn't save him, but he changed my perspective on gun violence. First, his death drove me to learn more about firearm suicide, to realize that in the emergency department, we rarely saw suicide attempts from a gun, not because they were rare, but because they were so often fatal. Second, his death led me to question why we didn't think about gunshot wounds the same way we think about
How
drunk
many
driving or heart
medical
disease
accidents
as something we can
does
and should
the
prevent.
medical
Most
field
disturbingly,
have
I
that
noticed the
causes
difference in
deaths
how
of
my
Americans
colleagues
every
responded
year?
to the suicide
Because it's
compared
up
to
in
the
the
everyday
like
toll
hundreds
of
of
community gun
thousands
violence.
instead of
Since that case, I have treated people for every type of firearm
14
injury,
to
from domestic violence to victims of
17,000
drive-bys.
for firearms.
I've saved some lives, but not all, and have informed countless families of the loss of their loved ones. And it is because I have had a front row seat to our nation's growing firearm injury epidemic that I have worked to define and implement a public health approach to this crisis. To clarify, this is how a public health approach works. First, we gather data on the problem. How
Listen to
common
the
is it and
slogans,
who is
and
affected?
notice there's no numbers.
Second, we define risk and protective factors.
Listen
What
to the
increases or
slogans.
decreases the chance of someone being hurt or dying?
That's where she's at.
Third, we figure out programs that work to change those patterns, to avert injury, hospitalization, or death. And finally, we scale what works. We have example after example of how this four-step approach, when applied systematically, can improve human health without abrogating rights. For example, we decreased car crash deaths, as Chairman Durbin mentioned, by more than 70% over the last few decades, despite more cars being on the road, by quantifying the problem, identifying risk factors, developing multifaceted solutions ranging from reducing drunk driving to putting airbags in cars, and then by scaling what worked. Unfortunately,
it's
we
not
have
about
not yet
solving
consistently
problems for these
applied this approach to firearm injury.
They're
As a
focused
result,
on
we are
one
facing
thing,
a
which
growing
is the
epidemic.
implement, which is the
America's
firearm.
total number of gun
And that's the only
deaths
thing
is
they're
the
after.
highest on record, and our
Some are
rate
after that because
nears
they're
its
too
peak.
ignorant to
Firearm deaths have
understand that
surpassed breast cancer deaths in America. Firearms are now the leading cause of death for American children age 1 through 19. Although mass shootings get the most media attention,
comparisons.
two-thirds
They're too
of firearm
stupid
deaths
to
are
understand
preventable
comparisons
suicides
between
averaged over the last decade,
Other ones are just
like
after
that young
firearms
man I
because
cared
they're
for
after the
15 years
control.
ago. The remainder are mostly community violence and, to a lesser extent, domestic violence. Although there are clear risk factors and disparities, it is a problem that affects all of us. More than half of American adults say that they or a family member has been involved in a shooting. More than 3/4 say the fear of gun violence has led them to change something in
No,
their
yeah,
lives.
Warsaw. We'll have
The
to do
effects
a
of this
whole nother
epidemic are
freaking
wide and
stream on
long, ranging
stuff
from
like that,
immediate
man.
medical costs,
'Cause
estimated
there's
by
a
the
couple
Government
of videos in
Accountability
that
Office
vein
at
that
$1
I
billion
want to
a
do.
year, to long-term mental
So
health,
yeah, I get where
economic,
you're
and
going. We're
educational
gonna have to.
impacts.
We're gonna have
Mothers,
to work a
fathers, friends,
whole
as well as
freaking
first
stream over
responders
that.
all experience anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress after a nearby shooting. These dismal statistics aside, as an ER doc and public health dean, I have confidence we can turn the tide. 4 things are needed to help us apply this public health approach successfully: improved data, improved research funding,
Yeah, Matt.
improved training of healthcare and public health professionals
Every
and
day.
community members to help us recognize and act on risk,
Education is
and
not
most of all, improved
a
collaboration with
measure
the
of
most
how
affected
smart
communities,
someone
whether
is.
rural or urban. And this
There
is where we need
definitely
your
has to
help.
be a distinction in
First, help
between.
us get better data so American can better measure, predict, and evaluate this health crisis. You can make this happen, whether by funding data modernization for the CDC or by removing barriers to data sharing amongst state, territorial, and local partners, as Utah has done. Help us with federal funding for research to develop and evaluate solutions. At a minimum, continue current levels of
There is
appropriations
no
for the NIH and
restriction on the
CDC, and
federal
ideally
government
appropriate more.
collecting data on
Help us
firearms
by
deaths.
supporting our
There's none.
scaling up and training of folks
None.
on things that do
There
work.
is
I'm
a
happy to talk about
prohibition
this
on
in
the federal
Q&A.
government
And
using
finally,
that
help
data
our
to
country
push
have
a
hope
narrative.
by demonstrating collaborative
That's where the
action, as
restriction
you have done
comes in.
before.
That's
We
what
are
they don't
turning
like.
into a nation of traumatized survivors. But I have
HBS, what's
story
up,
after
brother?
story of public health collaborations between gun owners and non-gun owners, hospital workers and community violence interrupters, faith leaders and survivors. We have shown we can reduce the risk of a shooting long before someone picks up a gun with intent to harm. Through your bipartisan commitment to this public health approach, our country can reduce firearm injury and death for all. Thank you.
Thank you,
So
Dr.
she
Randy.
listed
I'm
a
gonna
lot of
start with,
slogans in
5
there, a
minutes
lot of
questions and then turn
freaking
over to my colleagues,
keywords.
each having the same opportunity.
Didn't say
I listened
jack
to those who are
shit
critical of our even having
about
this hearing
family
and talking about this.
and
There's
how,
so many
as the
more
family's
important things we
degraded,
can talk about.
shootings have
And yet, I just
stepped
wonder
up.
if there's anything more important than life or death in your average neighborhood. Is there anything more important than knowing that that little boy or
HBS,
little
we're
girl that
kicking
you
ass,
sent to
baby.
school
We
this
trying
morning
to
is safe in the
make it.
classroom, doesn't have to hide under his desk, active shooter drills and exercises? You know, that really gets down to the basics. If you want to know about the safety of your family, it starts with the knowledge that when that child goes to school, he's going to come home safe at the end of the day. If you can't answer that question affirmatively, what in the hell are the rest of the questions worth? This, to me,
Night
is a
strike. I
fundamental
wouldn't admit
issue,
that in
and
public.
it is a
Man.
public
Erase
health
that
issue.
comment.
It
If you agree
involves
with
not
me on a lot of
hairstyles,
stuff,
it
no, just
involves
erase
death.
it. No,
Death by
just erase it.
gunshot.
Get rid of it.
And it's going on in
Um,
America every single damn day. And we
Believe
have
it
a
or not, it do
responsibility
make
to do
sense every
something.
once in a
here.
while.
Not just to say we need to fund the police more. I'll sign up for that. We need to deal with mental health counseling. I'll sign up for that as well. But are we going to do some basic things like safety locks on guns so the kids can't play with them? Are we going to do anything basic like
How about we do something on
identifying
educating
people who
kids
should
on
not even
guns?
be considered owners of guns and have
Hold on.
take
Oh,
advantage of
another
the
rant.
gunshot,
Hold on.
the gun store loophole?
We have to
That to me
take
is
this,
an example of what.
pause this, throw this back up. He's going through all this bullshit. Okay. How about we educate kids on guns? How about if you have a gun in your home, you educate your children that that's not a toy. If you're someone like me who hunts and shoots deer and does stuff like that, don't take your kids and separate them from that animal was alive 1 minute and then it was shot and dead as a bag of hammers within the next split second. Educate your children. See, one of the ways that we have stopped a lot of things with drunk driving and other things, we've done that through education. Have there been government mandates? Yes. The government mandates, however, have done nothing but drive up the cost of products and, excuse me, drive up the cost of products and give police so much power that they can pull someone over for a very minor traffic infraction. Then they can put them through a series of tests that they may or may not pass, but it's up to the discretion of the officer to whether that person goes to jail or not for being intoxicated or not. We just really let the government abuse the system. There are ways to go about fixing these issues, and there are ways to go about giving government more power. And all Dickie Durbin and his crew talk about are ways to give the government more power, not actually fix the fucking problem. That's the sheer insanity of this to me. Is people will believe the words that are falling out of his face, and they have no ability to critically think for themselves and ask the question, how does this work? But yet, here we are. Again, this hearing was today. This ain't old news.
Some states have taken a lead on this, and some may be surprising. Is there any restriction on buying a gun in the state of Wyoming, one of the most Republican states in the United States? Yes, turns out they have a state law that says you have to be 21 years of age.
Yeah, he
We're
did
still
say
debating
gun
this on
store
a national
loophole. He
basis.
meant gun
Even a
show
conservative
loophole.
Republican state like
I
Wyoming
know where he
thinks
was
that
going
makes
with
common
it.
sense.
Yeah, he said
I
gun
agree
store
with him.
loophole.
I want to ask a question.
Like I go to the gun store and
I have
just
so many
grab
I
gun.
could ask, but Dr.
Loophole.
Coney Gay and Mr. Bryan. And it really gets down to an experience I had thanks to Children's Memorial
Durbin's a
Hospital,
piece of shit.
Lurie Children's Memorial Hospital in Chicago.
Wouldn't give him the
They
fucking
gathered
gratification.
some
Call him a
gunshot
turd.
victims together, and I met with them in private and said to them, okay, close the doors. This is off the record. What is it this old white guy ought to know about what's really happening in the streets of Chicago? Finally, when they loosened up and started giving me a response,
Okay. Let's ask this question, just because I'm a smart ass. He's talking to people from Chicago. I assume he's talking to people who are a darker melanin content to him. And it's not racist for him to go, okay, what does this old white guy need to know about this shit? Because obviously you black folks are the ones fucking shooting each other. Man, fuck these people. but they'll get covered. Like one of the ways I found this hearing has happened today, because I hadn't looked at it in a couple of days. I didn't realize this was going on when it happened. But I follow Forbes and a bunch of other news places on my YouTube, and it started popping up. Durbin says this during hearing. This person says this during hearing. And it's all just fucking sound bites. And that's all it is. And you have Republicans, so-called Republicans, running in, and they're hell, okay, yeah, we'll be in this hearing with you. And I don't know. That train of thought went places I can't mention.
I learned a lot in a very short period of time.
So yeah,
I'll never forget two who talked about the homes they grew up in. One young man, African American,
listen to this shit.
said, Senator, I grew up in a house with no rules. When I woke up this morning and opened my eyes, I decided what time I'd get out of bed, whether I'd go to school. I decided whether I'd stay out on the streets all day and all night. I decided whether I'd buy drugs or guns. That was my decision. There were no rules in my house. I contrasted that with my own life. From the minute I opened my eyes in the morning until I closed them at night, there were rules flying at me in every direction. Get up, make your bed, brush your teeth, make your lunch, take care of your little sister, make sure that we have the dog out for a walk. And when you get to school, there's a nun waiting there with 100 more rules. And the penalty is to burn in hell if you didn't follow them. What a contrast in formative years. The second thing was a young woman who said, I was a mother. She was probably in her 20s. She said, I was a mother at the age of 14. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. I said, why? She said, my mother was a junkie. She brought boyfriends home, took advantage of her, and then turned to me. Finally, with that baby, I got out of the...
Okay. So, and I might be stopping this a little early at this point, commenting on what he's saying, but do you notice everything these younger people are talking about has to do with broken families? Oh, no one gave me a schedule. No one told me what to do. Well, that's what your fucking parents are for, you fucking dumbass. And if your parents didn't tell you that, well, then they're fucking morons. Oh, well, no. Most of this shit could be solved by focusing on things that would basically revive the nuclear family, whether it's tax code, whether it's freaking getting rid of this horse shit welfare stuff where, they can only make so much while the guy's in the house. The guy's not in the house. Women can make more money. And get rid of all that shit. We've been through 70 fucking years of the government destroying the nuclear family. Now we end up with shit like this, and you guys still want more government control over things, and you're still begging the fucking government to solve the issue for you. No, the government is the fucking issue. Their policies and the shit you vote for is what's made things this goddamn bad. I want to hear, are there strong women out there who are taking care of their kids? Yes, there are. Are there dads out there who had a kid with someone and they're trying to take care of them, but the woman won't let them? Yes, there are. Those issues, I promise you, will solve them motherfucking selves when you take the government out of the goddamn equation and you make men responsible for where they put their dicks, and you make women responsible on whose dicks they let put in them. It is really that simple. But what do I know? All this shit wasn't happening when you could get a full automatic machine gun mailed to your front door, cash on delivery for $185. All this wasn't happening when kids pulled up to their schools and had their deer rifles and their duck guns and all the other shit in the racks behind their seat. None of this was happening until we sprinkle all this government intervention in the middle, who's supposed to make everything better, and all of a sudden everything gets worse, and these dickheads still vote for the same shit. Yeah. We'll let this play.
That house, I had a chance. I made something of my life as a result. Those are contrasting life experiences, which I don't know personally, but are part of this calculation. So let me ask the two of you. Can we reach young people who have gone through those traumatic experiences and turn their lives around from violence? Doctor?
Thank you, Senator Durbin. First of all, thank you for sharing the story. And there's a phrase that I like to use that's connected to individuals that have lived similar lives, is that no one person should be judged by the worst thing that they've done in their lives. The work that we use, focusing on individuals that are survivors of violence, that have actually caused harm themselves, either in the hospital or in the community-based side, these are individuals that have desisted from that, but they've learned from that. They understand the impact that trauma has. That mom that was a junkie, there's a reason why that mom was a junkie. What the role that trauma has on the household impacts parental practices, monitoring, how parents and families monitor their children. We need to uplift the role that trauma plays in our society. I believe in this room, we both agree that the impact that trauma has in terms of suicide rates, we take that same frame, we humanize, but we understand that the individuals that should be trusted to intervene are individuals that have led that life themselves, and they're asking individuals to walk on the same path that they've walked on because they understand that path. When it comes to addressing issues connected to trauma, you have to really understand the role of trust. A lot of our systems, over time, trust has been eroded. And so having individuals that understand that life is an important first step.
Thank you. Mr. Bryant, you've got 30 seconds.
Yes, I would agree. I would add not only people with the lived experience, but also trained experts in mental health paired with those folks to work to heal our communities. The average age of the folks that we work with is about 31. So imagine a 31-year-old Black male who hasn't finished high school, never had a formal job. A lot of times they've grown up, similarly with no rules. And if we can get to those people and help heal those people, then they're going to be.
Okay. Hang on to that right there for a second. Let's hit this. And most of you guys in the chat that I've seen that are chatting, Barton, Warsaw, a lot of you guys know, I went to prison. Now, I was in a daycare. I was not in big boy prison. Trust me, it was a fucking daycare. But there is a point where, like this guy's talking about, you have to reach people and you have to touch them in a way. You have to share some experience with them to kind of correct some things. All right. There are other people that need to be in prison. They need to stay in prison. They never need to get out of prison. Matter of fact, the only time they need to get out of prison is after they're like 1,000 years dead and they're basically dirt in the bottom of the prison cell. And there are plenty of mediums in between those. But again, if you want to fix a lot of this shit, get the government out of the way and let the family go back to being the family, and you fix most of this shit. You want to fix the other, say that's 85%, and you want to fix another at least 20% of it. Get these motherfuckers out of the education system. Okay, instead of their kindergarten teacher being blue-haired with piercings all through her face, she needs to be a person, whether she has those or not, who tells kids, hey, guess what? Life ain't fair. Well, they're eating an Oreo and that person's not eating an Oreo. Well, guess what? That motherfucker came prepared with an Oreo. And if they want to share with you, they will share with you. If they don't want to share with you, guess what? You don't get a motherfucking Oreo. This shit's not about you. There are plenty of things in your life that are going to be fucking unfair. I'm short, I'm fucking fat, and I'm way gray long before my time. Life ain't motherfucking fair. But guess what? You can always progress as long as you have those options. And it's not propping someone up who shouldn't be there in the first goddamn place. Quit teaching kids that life is about their fucking feelings and no one can understand them. Yes, everybody can understand you. I can go pick 9,000 46-year-old motherfuckers like me that knew what it was going to, felt like to go through fucking puberty in the 80s with your books in front of you, walking down the hallway with is what it is. You're nothing special. As the wife gets on. Okay.
Be not only better for their communities, but they're going to be better for their families, because typically they're going to have kids as well. And a lot of the times that when we see youth getting shot, it's related to an adult in their lives that is living a life that, is not necessarily dignified. And all of our work is really around engaging, healing, and putting people on a path to living a dignified life.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Senator Cornyn. The longer I've been in Washington, D.C. and worked in the United States Congress, the more I have come to believe that what divides us is not our goals so much as the means to achieve our goals. And here, obviously, we all would want to diminish and reduce violence in our communities. Mr. Cook, years ago, there was a Project Exile in Richmond, Virginia, I guess was the first place that a concentrated effort between federal, state, and local law enforcement efforts to focus on essentially repeat criminals, felons, possessing firearms, using firearms, committing other offenses, to target that aspect of violence in our communities. That's now become Project Safe Neighborhoods, which I mentioned has passed the Senate earlier this year. Given your experience as a federal prosecutor, can you describe the importance of focusing our time and resources on that small microcosm, really, of our communities that are committing most of the violent acts using firearms in our communities?
Yes, sir, I can. Let me first begin by thanking you for championing the Project Safe Neighborhoods reauthorization, and to the members of this committee who voted for that. Project Safe Neighborhoods, which was a spinoff from the wildly successful Exile project in Richmond, that project itself has
you don't care whether you're on
with
video, because
the
you
cornerstone
run out of this
being
room
exactly
like
what you said,
Arizona
and that is to take partnerships with federal prosecutors, state and local law enforcement, take those partnerships, identify the worst of the worst, and put them in federal prison. But Project Safe Neighborhoods really is more comprehensive than that. It also has other components. In our district, it was very successful. We had a 23% reduction in the first 4 years of the project, but it was more than just putting people in prison. That was the cornerstone, but we also had a reentry program. We also had an educational component. We also had a community interface component. So Project Safe Neighborhoods has continued to produce great results across the country, varying as high as 41% reductions.
His wife's new move.
In addition to reauthorizing Project Safe Neighborhoods, what, in your opinion, what else should Congress be focusing on to make sure that we're dealing with this identifiable recalcitrant criminal element that are responsible for most of the violent crimes in our communities?
Federal prosecutors need the tools back that I mentioned that have been taken away. First of all, as I said, finality in the federal criminal justice system has been gutted, and it's been gutted because the courts and the Sentencing Commission have taken the authority that Congress has given it through 3582, and they have run with it. And I think they've far outstripped the authority that Congress intended. So first, I would suggest that Congress put guardrails on 3582, serious guardrails. Secondly, I think that Congress needs to look at the Armed Career Criminal Act and the related statutes and make amendments that correct the narrowing that the Supreme Court has taken over the years, because those tools are fundamental to our ability to put those trigger pulls, those violent criminals who are the key to reducing violent crime. Those are the tools we need to put them in prison and keep them there.
Would you move? Dr. Rainey, I applaud the efforts that you're undertaking. As you've heard, I have some questions about framing this as a public health crisis, but we'll leave that for discussion at another time. Let me ask you, in 2022, you did an interview with the American Medical Association where you said that mental illness is not a predictor of hurting others. Hatred is. Would you apply that to violent street gangs that are competing for territory and profits in communities across the country? Do you think it's hatred, or do you think it's something else?
Thank you, Senator Cornyn, and thank you again for your leadership with Senator Murphy on the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. As I outlined in my written testimony, studies have shown that people with serious mental illness are more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators of violence. Substance use and antisocial personality disorder are risk factors for being perpetrators of violence. And of course, as you outlined, mental illness is deeply connected to firearm suicide, which is the leading type of suicide, of firearm death in this country.
In your experience, do people suffering mental health crises tend to frequently self-medicate, which exacerbates their dangerousness to themselves and others?
That can happen if there's inadequate access to mental health treatment. I think it is worth noting that when you actually look at mass shooters, the vast majority of them were in an identifiable crisis prior to that mass shooting, but only slightly more than the average American population have been identified as having serious mental illness. An awful lot of them are suicidal. And so there is an element of getting folks treatment and access to care. It's also about limiting access to lethal means at that moment of a crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the chairman and ranking member for having this hearing. It may seem repetitive, but we need to continue this work because we face a public health crisis that is only expanding, as you have demonstrated, and we all know, simply measured in deaths and injuries. I've been working on it since the early 1990s when I first became Attorney General of the state of Connecticut, and we advocated then for an assault weapon ban, which was passed, was challenged in court. I defended it as Attorney General, and we have expanded in Connecticut on the types of gun violence prevention laws that we have, showing that these laws actually work. They've reduced deaths and injuries. Assault weapon ban, background check, Ethan's Law, providing for safe storage, and other kinds of measures like the red flag statute. Connecticut was the first in the nation to adopt it. So if we take the public health approach that Dr. Rainey has advocated, and we are data driven, as the medical professionals in this room wearing the white coats use every day, respecting facts, making decisions based on science, I think that we will continue to build on the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which we passed and showed that we can defeat the gun lobby, that the NRA and its allies are not implacable, invulnerable foes. Dr. Rainey, in your testimony, you mentioned the importance of violent crime as an indicator of potential additional gun violence. I'm struck by the statistic that 41% of patients treated for violent injury are re-injured within 5 years. In other words, there is a cycle here. There is a repetitive phenomenon. I think we can and we should ensure that more victims of violent crimes do not become repeat victims. And the Yale New Haven Hospital's Violence Intervention Program has been very effective in a number of ways in preventing the kinds of repeat injury after trauma. In your firsthand experience, can you describe for us how these programs work in practice and how maybe we can have some common ground here in supporting violence intervention programs like the one that Yale New Haven has in practice right now?
We're tremendously grateful for the Yale New Haven Health Violence Intervention Program, which was started in 2020. I also sit on the board of the Nonviolence Institute in Providence, Rhode Island, and have worked closely with folks in Chicago and elsewhere in community violence intervention programs. These are some of the programs with growing data behind them. I'll particularly highlight the CRED program led by former Secretary of Education Arne Duncan in Chicago. They provide life skills training and mental health support, as well as community mentorship. And rigorous research has shown that program correlates with decreased arrests for violent crime, as well as decreased likelihood of participants being shot. Similar statistics are available from programs in Missouri, from programs in DC,
Yeah, trust the
and from
science.
elsewhere across the country.
Wear your mask.
Again,
Trust
because
the
of those
science. Double
limitations
mask.
on the
Triple
public
mask.
health approach, which I outlined at the beginning, we
Vaccine.
can still have limited data on how effective they are. We don't have those formal randomized controlled trials, but this combination of providing a caseworker, mental health support, and substance use treatment when needed, and helping get folks into safe housing, help them get an education, has a demonstrated effect on both future injury, but also long-term life success.
I was very moved by your description and your testimony of the suicide victim that you tried to save, one of your first cases involving suicide by the use of firearms. There are loaded and unlocked guns in the homes of 4.6 million American children, like the son of that law enforcement officer you described. I've been an advocate of Ethan's Law, passed in the Connecticut legislature.
We have to ask.
And introduced it here in Congress along with Representative Rosa DeLauro.
We have to do this. We have to do this.
Why?
We have to do this live.
Wait,
Okay.
Where do my spectacles go?
Hold on. Your spectacles right here. So here's the question my wife just asked me. Do you think Jeffrey Dahmer used seasoning? So let's throw a 1 in the chat if he used seasoning and a 2 in the chat if you think he went raw
Wait.
dog.
Where was it? Milwaukee? Is that where he was?
Where was Jeffrey? Jeffrey Dahmer was active over a large part of the country for a while, wasn't he?
No, that was Ted Bundy. Jeffrey Dahmer was one location.
I don't think Jeffrey Dahmer was one location. And anyway, we're getting some ones in. Yeah, he was definitely seasoning some shit.
I don't know, because if it was Milwaukee, that's like white light.
You think he put like butt rub on it when he was doing the gay guy? My wife just looked at me and went,
You know?
you know, maybe.
Probably.
Again, you can't let my sense of humor stay out there too long.
I don't know. If he'd have been Louisiana, it would have had been Creole, but I'm pretty sure it's like Milwaukee.
I'm pretty damn sure he would Tony Satchery some ass in a hurry. If you don't know who Tony Satchery is, you just don't. You need to wake up.
How do you think they came up with the Five Guys season?
I'm gonna fucking die.
That's a good one.
Still getting over a chest cold. I'm gonna die. Oh man.
Ew. Hold on, science, because I've got to know.
Fish you ate children.
Where's my phone?
Season their butt.
Your phone will work.
Yeah, dude. Hey, look, I know that some white people like bland food. I'm not one of them. Trust me. You should see the tan when I get it. But yeah, I couldn't. No, I couldn't.
It is Milwaukee.
Huh?
It was Milwaukee.
Was it Milwaukee?
Yeah.
I thought it was active
Yeah.
longer than that. Well, in a larger place than that.
Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
So when he ate people in wheelchairs, was he just eating his vegetables?
What's the hardest part of a vegetable to eat?
The head
The wheelchair.
of the wheelchair.
Or the wheels.
I was going to say, if when you eat all your vegetables, what do you do with wheelchairs? Oh, with gasoline pants on. With gasoline pants on.
The House side,
which
would prohibit unsecured storage of firearms. Could you speak to how secured storage
Was
helps
that one the
reduce
Albert
suicide
Fish? Was he
or
one of the
other
ones in the UK?
supposedly accidental shootings?
Absolutely. So the majority of youth suicides and school shootings perpetrated by youth, including an article that actually just came out today in JAMA, are committed with a family member's firearm. Obviously, youth can't legally purchase firearms, and so they find a parent's firearm, which many of us think is stored safely. But when you actually ask kids, they all know where their parent has stored their firearm, the same way that our kids all know where their birthday presents are stored. And studies have shown that they actually can access it quite quickly. States that have put safe storage laws in place see a 20 to 25% decrease in child firearm fatalities. But I will emphasize that the legislation alone is not enough. It needs to be matched with community engagement, with enforcement, with education. Many of the firearm groups that I work with are tremendous advocates for safer storage of firearms. And there are ways to do this again without abrogating gun owners' rights.
Because
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Grassley.
Ms. Schwer, in February, I reintroduced a bill that I call the Eagles Act, focusing on using behavioral threat assessment model to identify individuals showing pre-attack
The amount of
behavior
shit flies through
and manage the
construction
threat to
sites
prevent target
and
violence. How does behavioral threat
military
assessment model
and
prevent gun violence, if you think it
Uh,
does? And is this something
so,
worth expanding?
I will mention
Thank
one
you,
name.
Senator, for that
Summer.
question. I think when we're talking about behavioral threat assessment, the most often aspect in which it comes up is preventing, like you said, targeted acts of specifically mass violence. And I think it can be incredibly useful in that capacity, as Dr. Rainey mentioned. A lot of these perpetrators of mass violence, while they may not be diagnosably seriously mentally ill, a lot of them are in some sort of crisis. Most often it is noticeable in the weeks, sometimes months and years leading up to that incident. It's fairly rare that you have a perpetrator of mass violence who, when all is said and done, people turn around and say, oh, we never saw that coming. Most of the time, it is fairly identifiable beforehand. And so that training in professional threat assessment, helping people identify those factors and then knowing what to do about those factors, how to assess them, and what proper steps to take. That's all very important when we're talking specifically about targeted violence, but also there's a lot that we can do with that in terms of suicide as well, because a lot of people who are suicidal, again, that is noticeable, that lead up to crisis is noticeable. And so it allows us to intervene before we reach that crisis point or before that crisis point becomes violent or fatal.
Again, for you, going to the problems we've talked about here in Washington, D.C., the average homicide suspect has been arrested 11 times prior to their committing a homicide. What role do progressive prosecutors who refuse to charge gun violence offenses and other violent crimes committed by criminals play in gun violence epidemic?
Yeah, so I will note that
both
my
sides.
colleagues, Cully Simpson and Zach Smith, have written extensively on this issue as well. Again, when we're talking about this small subset of repeat offenders who are overwhelmingly responsible, either directly or indirectly for facilitating that crime, when you just release them back into their communities without prosecution, without any sort of detaining of them, you're releasing them to continue committing the exact same crimes over and over. And in some cases, it actually emboldens them because now they realize, well, I can probably get away with this.
Amy
Statistically, even if I am arrested, I'm not going to be prosecuted. And if I am prosecuted, they're going to let me right back out. That's
You are
not
awfully
deterrence
damn
at all.
distracting.
There is no deterrence factor. We are essentially eliminating
Admins.
any perceived reason for criminals to stop
That
committing
seems
criminal
like
actions.
a personal problem.
Again, for you, in August, the Justice Department issued a proposed rule that would increase the number of folks who have to register for federal firearm license in order to do business that way. The rule says, quote, even a single firearm transaction or offer to engage in a transaction when combined with other evidence.
yeah, that's
may be
always the greatest
sufficient to
lines.
require a license. And
How will it work?
in April,
Bob, what's your
Director
face?
Dettelbach told the House Judiciary Committee
I've never seen
that when
Fire
ATF
ought to be
writes
cool,
its
brother.
proposed rule,
Fire's
it,
been around
quote,
forever.
looks at the law that Congress passes and the public
Fire's
safety
cool as fuck.
threat
It's been around
to
forever.
America, end of quote. In your opinion, does this new rule apply to the law as written by Congress? And if not, explain why you feel that way.
Thank you, Senator. And no, I think anytime you have a very slight wording change and the proposed regulations are essentially 108 pages explaining how it was sort of a way more significant, that should be a red flag immediately that it's not actually consistent with the change in the law. I think most concerning are some of the sort of presumptions that ATF wants to now write into to say, look, if you do X, Y, and Z, it's presumed you needed an FFL even if you did it once, because it includes things like in selling the firearm with the original manufacturer's packaging. That packaging includes things that are essential for gun safety, including the user's manual and the original trigger locks that had to have been sold with it. To say that selling those items now means that you are suddenly an FFL when you would not have otherwise been disincentivizes private unlicensed individuals from including that important safety info. So when we're looking at that sort of absurdity, we have a problem with the law, even above and beyond. Do I think it reflects the federal statute? And I don't think it does.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. Senator Hirono.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that I heard my colleague, Senator Cornyn, say that we have a shared goal, and I would say that our shared goal is to decrease gun violence in our country, the number one killer of young people in our country. And how do we do that? One of the ways is to, I suppose, lock up the violent criminals, although I'm not so sure that that's what we're doing, that our prisons are populated, have been populated for a long time with maybe not violent, nonviolent drug cases. Be that as it may, for Dr. Ramey, you've worked in this area. Are there other things that Congress can do to decrease the easy access to guns, which results in the deaths of our young people?
One of the biggest things, which I know is partly addressed in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, is around domestic violence and domestic violence restraining orders. We know that if a perpetrator of domestic violence has access to a gun, you see a 500% increase in the risk of the victim being killed by that gun. We know that most murder-suicides are partner violence. Most mass shootings are domestic violence related, and domestic violence is a leading cause of premature death. We also know that states with limits on firearm access by people under a domestic violence restraining order have a significant decrease in firearm partner violence. So that's a significant thing that Congress can do. Extreme risk protection orders or red flag laws are also, the data suggests, tremendously effective in decreasing suicide death in particular. And there's some anecdotal evidence that they may help in reducing mass shooting deaths. And then lastly, of course, data and accurate assessments of whether or not these things work matter deeply. The American public deserves us to spend money and legislation on programs that work, and funding both data and research helps with that enterprise.
Thank you for noting that domestic violence situations are among the worst things leading to gun violence. And I'm sure you're familiar with the Fifth Circuit case based on Bruin, where in a domestic violence situation, the Fifth Circuit tossed out the use of a gun because of a person who was under domestic violence order, I think. Anyway, this case is before the Supreme Court. What are your concerns about if the court sustains the Fifth Circuit in terms of the ability of the federal government or anybody else to limit gun accessibility from people who have domestic violence?
Your name's not Daisy Orono.
So there's two sides to this. One is the personal. I've taken care of
And when have
multiple
I ever
victims
called you
of
an absolute
domestic violence
moron?
shootings, and they are like those firearm suicides, just horrifying.
No, I've said
never
you
come out
be
of the blue.
moronic.
Folks know before
I've
they
never
happen
said
that
you
they are
were
at
a
risk.
moron.
I lost a colleague, a fellow
It's
emergency
not the
physician
same
in 2018, who was shot and killed as she walked out of a shift at a Chicago hospital by her
welcome,
ex-fiance. So this is something that has tremendous personal resonance to me. The other side of it is that domestic violence is one of those very well-established risk factors for violence against self and others. Again, not just against the partner, but also against children, family members, and society at large. And so there is tremendous concern on the part of the health and public health community that should that Rahimi case be decided to overturn the prohibitions on firearm ownership by folks with a history of conviction of domestic violence, that it will have tremendous negative downstream effects for Americans in general, in terms of the number and severity of firearm injuries.
And you are referring to the Romina case, which is before the Supreme Court. Thank you for making the connection between domestic violence situations and gun violence. But the Bruin decision is leading to unexpected consequences, I would say, and in many criminal proceedings, the criminals or the people who are being tried are using the Bruin decision for the proposition that they cannot be prevented from owning a gun. So the Bruin decision is going to continue to create a lot of questions. In fact, in Hawaii, for example, we have some of the strictest gun laws, and many of these laws are being challenged under the Bruin decision. So I think that
and they should be
the Bruin decision is one that I think Congress should look at. I realize that that decision is based on a constitutional right to bear arms, but it is not an unfettered right. And I think that there is probably more that we can do to limit the impact of the Bruin decision. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Senator Kennedy.
Is that not correct?
It's not correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Rainey.
Correct.
Welcome.
Not.
You are an ER doc? Okay.
Correct.
And understand you've been on television a lot?
A fair amount.
Yes, ma'am. And I understand you built a home television studio, is that right?
That's a bit of an exaggeration. I had a laptop on a stool.
Your husband didn't build you a home studio?
He did not build me a home studio, no.
Okay.
I think I snapped crap under your bed.
Let me ask you this.
I know.
Why do you think that Chicago has become America's largest outdoor shooting range? Do you think it's because of Chicago citizens who have no criminal record, but who have lawfully a gun in their home for protection, or perhaps for hunting?
The heck was that?
I think it's because of a finite group of
Where's it?
criminals who
I need
have
to-
No, Vanessa's in. She was
rap
in her-
sheets as long as
Rude.
King Kong's arm.
So Mississippi, Louisiana, and Missouri actually have higher firearm death rates. Obviously, there's
Hey!
certain.
What about Chicago?
So I don't live in Chicago. It's not my primary area of research.
You don't have an opinion on that?
I think there's easy access to firearms combined with environmental conditions, lack of
Well,
great education.
everybody-
There have actually been studies showing that when you green
About
vacant
mosquitoes.
lots and repair abandoned buildings in urban neighborhoods, you see decreases in gunshots and
Yo,
violence,
you're
as
shy
well as
now.
expansion and depression in the neighborhoods around them.
No
This
disrespect,
little
Doc,
booger-
but that sounds a lot like word salad to me.
We'll tell you everything.
Let me ask you
know about
this,
tornadoes and
in
hurricanes and
September
earthquakes,
of
Nice.
earthquakes,
our New
and
Mexico governor
tsunamis.
issued a public health emergency order.
Mhm.
And she suspended the right to bear arms in Albuquerque and the surrounding county. Do you support that?
I do not. What I do support is the work that New Mexico
Yeah,
has
but
done
do you
with.
support that?
No,
Okay.
And for that heel stomp, your
Let's
martial
see.
arts skills are improved.
During his first 2 years as the DA in Philadelphia, District Attorney Krasner and Loster dropped 47% of all the illegal firearms cases in the city. Do you agree with that?
I'm not a lawyer. I'm a physician and a public health professional. I can say that New Mexico has done amazing work in trying to
I'm
address
asking
the
about,
suicide and partner
I'm
violence.
asking about Philadelphia.
I don't have an
The DA
opinion.
dropped 47% of all the illegal firearms cases. Did he do the right thing there?
I don't have an opinion. However, I will say that just as with
Most of the
fentanyl,
time when
spread of
something
illicit
starts with a-
substances.
Sorry to cut you off, but I'm.
That's
running
okay.
out
An
of time.
illegal gun.
Understood.
The LA District
There are a lot of
Attorney,
other crimes involved. They plead that shit
George
out.
Gaston,
Lowest charge, just-
said that he would not prosecute any sentencing
Have some
enhancements
news
for
that
guns or gang-related
using
activity.
firearms to threaten the
You
public.
you think he did the right thing?
Again, I am neither a lawyer nor a prosecutor.
You don't have an opinion on that?
It shouldn't
I
be
honestly don't know enough about it to have an
downgraded
opinion.
charges.
You don't
It should
think
be
gangs should
you're
be
going to jail.
prosecuted for having illegal guns?
I'm neither a lawyer nor a prosecutor, and that's not my area of research.
Yet you want to take guns away
I've never said that I want to take
from
guns away.
law-abiding citizens.
I think that you are saying something that I've not said in my written or oral testimony, sir.
Okay. You equated gun deaths to heart disease in your opening statement.
Yes, sir.
Which is a greater public health problem? Gun deaths or heart disease?
So heart disease does kill more folks across the United States, largely in
Might be
the
About
end of their life.
700,000?
Mhm.
Gun deaths about 50,000?
Correct.
Do you support outlawing fried foods?
I'm sorry. How does that relate to?
Because fried foods contribute to heart disease, don't they?
Again, I have not written or said that I
I'm sure
support
you're a
outlawing.
physician, right?
I am. Have I said that I support outlawing anything in my testimony today?
Let me ask one more question. I'm sorry, I cannot see that far, Doctor, on the very end.
Cozy Gay, thank you.
Yes, sir. You said, I wrote it down. You
Daddy,
said
what?
that no one should be judged by the worst thing they have done in their lives.
Correct.
If one of these young doctors sitting behind you, God forbid, walks out on the streets of Washington, D.C.
My children.
and is raped or sodomized,
I'm not your
you
driver.
don't think the rapist should be judged?
I'm calling
I
you
don't
daddy.
think it should be terminal. It shouldn't be for the rest of their lives.
You think we should forgive them and not give them any punishment?
I believe in
You think
forgiveness.
nobody's responsible for their actions?
I believe in responsibility. I believe in forgiveness.
Thank you, Mr. Wow. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Because I'm leaving you.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Button.
And I got to go to the restaurant. and put pizzas in there.
Thank you, Chair Durbin, Ranking Member Cornyn, for convening the committee on such an incredibly important topic.
Go watch shows.
Get off my phone. Go.
I want to also appreciate our witnesses for joining us today, offering such incredible testimony. Most importantly, Mr. Chair, I'd like to appreciate the physicians and clinicians who've joined us today for their dedication in helping us to protect our members of our community, and also for your dedication in helping our country combat this important crisis. Mr. Chair, I agree with the words that you offered. This is a conversation that is about our children. It's a conversation that, in my opinion, is very much about the future of our democracy. Dr. Rainey, I'd like to direct my first question to you. For decades, Congress has refused to allow CDC to use federal dollars to research gun violence prevention. Finally, in December 2019, Congress passed the Gun Violence Prevention Research Act, which granted $25 million per year to the CDC and the National Institute on Health to study gun violence prevention from 2020 to 2022. For those who feel like they know everything and that we keep having the same conversation, Dr. Rainey, can you tell us what this money has been used to help us learn, and what more do we still have to understand relative to gun violence prevention?
So that money is currently being used to study things such as projects working with the National Guard to try to decrease firearm suicide through lethal means counseling, projects working with families to improve safe storage of firearms when someone has dementia to reduce the chance of intentional or unintentional injury or death. It's being used for projects to describe risk factors, to evaluate programs like the one that I mentioned around putting gardens in vacant lots, which has shown to decrease gun violence in surrounding neighborhoods, to see can we expand that work. There are projects that are being, I mean, I could go on. It's a whole bunch of things like that where we try to identify what are the patterns of injury, how do we identify risk and protective factors, and then how do we intervene, again, in the same way that we intervene for heart disease. Maybe there are medications, maybe there are counseling efforts like teaching people about obesity or smoking. And then potentially there may be legislation, but legislation alone is never sufficient.
Thank you. Mr. Vaughn Bryant, I'd love to now turn my next question to you. In a related topic brought by Senator Hirono, gun violence really does sit at the intersection of another public health crisis, that being intimate partner violence. In the United States, approximately 1 in 5 women and 1 in 7 men have experienced severe physical violence by an intimate partner. On average, 3 women in this country are killed each day by a current or former intimate partner. When an abusive intimate partner has access to a firearm, that victim is 5 times more likely to be killed, as has been noted. My question to you is based on your community violence approach, prevention approach. Have you seen what has been the impact of your particular approach, the approach that your organization offers as it relates to intimate partner violence?
So we would say that interpersonal conflict in general is one of the precepts to gun violence, and oftentimes either intimate partner violence or conflict between intimate partners in general often leads to a larger conflict, which also leads to death. So for us, we have partnered with local domestic violence organizations to learn more about intimate partner violence. All of our clinicians are trained in domestic violence as well, so that they're understanding of that as they work with the people that we're really trying to seek. And we will on an ongoing basis continue to strengthen that relationship so that we're aware, but that we're also teaching our domestic partner, domestic violence partners.
We having
about
fun
our
yet?
work so that we can continue to strengthen what we know is a precipitant to gun violence.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Blackburn.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes. But turn the light back on
Being here today for your
because it's
thoughtful
relaxing
answers.
not having the light
And
on.
I think, Mr. Chairman, we can all say we want to make certain that children are safe when they go to school. And I want to start with that. Ms. Swear, let me come to you. I'm a mom. I'm a grandmom. I've spent so much of my work on making certain that we protect children.
Take it
and
easy,
that
Night
they
Strike. We'll
have
catch you on another
an
one.
environment where
We
they
got to get
can
together and do another
learn,
show
whether it's
sometime
they're
in
at
the next
school
little while, brother.
or in community
So
activities.
we'll get
And
together on something.
I think we
Even if
all
it's
know
just a
that
shoot the
there
shit
are
session.
violent
Ain't got to
criminals
be nothing serious.
that are in our communities. And we know
And
that
yes,
our
I do
schools
fall
need
asleep better
training,
with the lights out.
and they need security tools to keep
I'm
children
also a little
safe.
bit more
And
rambunctious.
that's why I introduced the
Pending.
Safe School Act. This is a concept I've
It's his
worked
line.
on
He
for
can tell it
years.
like
It
he
would be a $900
This is my
million
line. Tell it any damn
grant
well.
program that would allow schools to harden and to have the technology that they need to keep children safe and to increase their physical security. And it would also allow schools to work with local law enforcement and train and hire former police officers
Yeah, my wife
to
showed
work
me video
as
of this
school
doe
security
blowing.
officers. So
She's
I'd like for
fired.
you to talk for just a moment
that doe
about
bloweth,
the
then that doe let's
immediate
do it.
need that we have to
Undulations.
make certain that
Yes.
children are safe at school.
For those of you
So
guys
thank
who
you
deer
for
hunt,
your
if
question,
the doe
Senator.
blows,
First, I
she
think it's
goes,
important to acknowledge that statistically speaking,
regardless of
our
what
schools are
ever else
actually
is going
pretty
on.
safe places for children. It's not statistically speaking where they are most likely to be shot. It's outside of school. That said, there's still a lot of work we can do. No child should have to go to school. No parent should have to send their child to school asking that question, is my child going to come home today? And that's a very real fear, even if statistically not the biggest part of the problem. And so by securing our schools, that's essentially what we're trying to do. This is not some unique thought. This is what we just walked into, all of us today, into this building with basic measures of security. We know that in terms of mass public shooting.
Okay, I got to stop Amy here for a sec. Because this is where we run into this. Adding every gun death into the same category, into the same basket, shaking everything up, and then saying, if we only did these things, these other things would disappear. No, it doesn't work that way. The vast majority of your gun murders, and I mean murders where someone is unduly taking the life of another person, is not your rampage killer. It's your every fucking weekend, and yes, I say that. It's your every weekend in your larger cities, in your inner city areas, over drugs, over running girls, you name it. It's about money and territory. That's what the major majority of your shootings are. A very small minority, a very small minority, are people who just decide that they want to go kill a bunch of innocent people. You're rampage killers. That's a very small percentage of what actually constitutes the major body of firearms deaths in the United States. Your overall is, of course, suicide. People who choose a gun to commit suicide, to take themselves out of the equation. Here's Coop's rant on suicide in a lot of cases. It's a pussy's way out.
It should not be counted as gun violence.
Because you are too much of a wuss, a pussy, to stand up to your circumstances. You decide to take yourself out. Have I thought about it? Oh, fuck yeah. I'm a normal human being. I have thought about it. I've never done it, and I'm not going to. So if I get Hillaried, you motherfuckers better be talking some shit. Because I'm not doing that.
You do remember that I put a shotgun in my mouth and pulled the trigger?
Yes.
Am I a pussy?
Yes.
Thanks for that.
Did you expect my answer to change somehow, somewhere, my opinion to suddenly transmorph?
It would have been nice.
Now, I know some people that have threatened to commit suicide plenty of times that I wish they would hurry up.
I think I know who you're talking about.
You think?
I think I do.
Yeah, I wish they. Matter of fact, one of the only regrets I really have in my life is taking a loaded shotgun out of their hands. Should have just let that shit just meld into its own event. But hey, that's me.
At schools, for example, the time that it takes for armed confrontation, the good guy with the gun to get there, that is the difference between life and death for a lot of people. We saw that.
Okay,
in
let's
Parkland.
talk a
Yep.
little bit about those mass shooters,
I know you do.
because we know that 25% of the mass shooters have been
Let's
diagnosed
just show me some.
with a mental health disorder. And we know 55% of American adults with mental illness have never sought treatment and never received any treatment.
Say I don't.
And we also know that 42% of mass shooters experienced physical abuse, sexual abuse, parental suicide, or severe bullying as children. And Tennessee has a phenomenally successful program to address and alleviate childhood trauma that serves as a model for the nation. And Senator Shaheen and I have introduced a bill that would make those services available nationwide, and the dollars to fund that. Dr. Rainey, it speaks a little bit to your work. But Ms. Schwer, if you will talk for a moment about
You've
the
called me, but it's
importance
plenty enough.
of addressing
About
mental illness,
that's
I
beside
would
the
appreciate
point.
that.
See?
Mr. Cook, I'm going to come to you for the wrap-up after her comment.
So, addressing untreated
You bust
mental illness
yourself
in
out by your own
particular,
mouth.
Including early intervention, getting people treatment
No.
before it becomes a crisis. This is important not just for suicide or for mass public shootings, so it certainly is important there. It's important for human flourishing. It's important even far beyond the scope of firearms. Again, we're talking about half of suicides, roughly half of suicides being with something other
What?
than a firearm. And so to the
Correct
extent
answer.
that we can get people in crisis help, especially lethal means
Art.
counseling
Hey,
about all
don't
lethal means,
play
not just
on the-
firearms. That saves lives, and it also again promotes human flourishing,
back.
promotes better
Don't
communities
encourage.
and healthier families, and that is important on a
Thank
grand
you.
scale.
Thank you, Mr. Cook,
Occasion.
and welcome. Glad to see my fellow Tennessean here today.
Pleased to be here. Thank you for having me.
Sure. I'd like your response on the intervention and the mental health component of mass shootings and
Go to
suicides.
guns.
Well, if I could also touch on
If I
the school
help.
issue that you raised, because part of the Project Safe
That's not what
Neighborhoods
we're talking
program that we
about.
had, and it was so successful in Knoxville, included interfacing with, as
Stay
you
in the
may
track
know,
of the
we had
argument.
school resource
Right.
officers.
That's
And
so
that was
makes me
attacked
wanna
nationally
bring
as part of the
fucking
defund
Bill
the
Burr.
police. It's an
I got that
incredibly
from.
important program
You're not- you're
as
missing
part
it.
of our comprehensive approach to reduce violent gun crime, because those
You're right.
individuals brought a very
It's not
positive
necessary to
influence
me out.
into
You're
the
right.
schools. They made a good impression on the
I'm gonna.
on the children of all ages, mostly high schoolers, in connection with our program, and
I still
proved to
haven't
be
got
a
a
critical
chess
component
ball she gave
in
me.
educating
have it too.
them
Shut up.
on the need to avoid gun violence and the
Interest area
resources
monkey.
that are available to them
I know.
in the community to avoid getting drawn into gang violence.
And that seems like you have a
I
problem with
appreciate that. My
self-control.
time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. I'm going to take a moment here, prerogative as chair of the committee, in light of testimony and questions earlier, to note that two of the three majority witnesses are from Chicago, which I'm honored to represent. I thank them for being here, And to also note that it is not unusual for my colleagues on the other side of the table to talk in negative terms about that city. I'm honored to represent it. It has many challenges, as most American cities do, and I'm going to work to make things better. But a question was asked of Dr. Rani about Chicago, which she answered, and then proceeded
Please don't lose it.
with the question from the senator from Louisiana to talk about other areas
That is my
facing
favorite clip. I
challenges
would
of gun
not look
violence
at you
that show that they're struggling even more than Chicago. I'd like to give you an opportunity to complete that answer.
Thank you. I think I was talking about Louisiana, New Mexico, Utah, other states with quite high rates of gun deaths, and talking about the beautiful collaborations between community members,
enjoy your
law
little nuts?
enforcement, and the legislature in those states to both set up great data tracking and then to work with community groups to put in place programs to decrease gun deaths. both
That's my
in the
clip. That
cities
is my
and in the
favorite clip.
Thank you for that. And I would say any
You don't
member
understand
of
how
this
hard it
panel
is for
who is
you to
naive enough
take
to
care of
believe
a
that
clip
this
that
state,
actually
per state,
holds.
will never be touched
And
by
it's
gun violence.
With
should
the what?
The hair.
consider what's happened just recently in the state of Maine, where the whole population of the state was asked to stand down.
Not seen your ass.
No one would have chosen Maine as the next target for gun violence, but the fact is, with 400 million guns in this country, every state, every city, every locality.
I'm sorry, you gotta think about it.
Okay.
Senator Booker.
And Harry, bud, I wouldn't.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a difficult issue for me because I live in Newark, New Jersey. I'm the only
All
senator
this
that lives
from
in
the one when we
urban
walked in the
community
shop,
that
you would
is,
recognize
live in a community below the poverty line. And I've had experiences with gun violence that is will chill me for the rest of my life. But one of the things frustrates me is often the racial tinge that this has, that we often talk about this as an urban problem. It actually infuriates me because I think it makes it harder for us to come together and realize this is an American problem affecting all American communities.
Mostly run by black.
And just so we can be factual, from 2016 to 2020, 13 of the 20 counties with the most gun homicides per capita were rural communities.
Hold on,
It is very frustrating that the talk about Chicago that I've heard so demonizes a city that actually doesn't have.
Cory Booker, shut up. You're a fucking moron. So
Pay good money to watch you and Al go through a sex shop. Pat would be there too. Pat, it would be funny as shit with Pat too, but I think you and Al bouncing off each other's humor.
Oh, it'd be
Sexual
horrible.
humor. Oh my god,
It'd be
that would
horrible.
be funny as shit.
Me and the wife. It was last weekend
Yeah.
because I shot a doe, female deer for you guys who don't hunt, and had to get some ice to throw her meat on the ice. And well, one of the best locations in Columbus, Georgia, is right next to a sex shop that's got an ice machine where you pay $2, you get 16 pounds of ice. Well, we had to go in the shop.
I mean,
Why?
you can't
Because
not.
it's me, and we had to go in the shop. And you walk in there. First, when you walk in the shop, poof, black chick behind the counter. Hey, y'all, and I'm in fucking game mode then. So we got to go look at everything. And they had all these dolls in the shop. Well, these dolls are basically life-sized, and apparently things fall off them. And she went to move one of them, and the head fell off, and the wig fell off. Well, she picked up the wig, and when I picked up the head, I looked her dead in her eyes and went, "You need a little head?" And this chick, without breaking stride, which makes me love her even more, she looked at me and went, "Too soon, dude."
Too soon.
And then set the doll up and put it back together. It was hysterical.
And then we had to fix her eyes because
Yeah.
her eyes went wonky.
Because the eyes and it's a whole fucking situation. It's hysterical as fuck.
And then she
Trust
started
me.
making fun of the doll. They named all the dolls. I think that was Susan.
Maybe.
Susan was heavy and needed to lay off the cornbread and collard greens.
I thought it was black eyed peas. It may have been something. Either way,
Cornbread and black eyed peas, I think that might have been it.
if you've never just rolled into the sex shop just because you had to buy ice, you haven't lived.
I highly recommend that
Just
shop.
saying. And if you're going to roll up in a sex shop, roll up in one that is mostly run by black women.
Have the
'Cause
highest
they are hysterical
murders per capita of American
Well, they
cities
don't-
or
they
even
simulate.
in American counties. And it really obscures the strategies to do something about this. Now, what urban communities like mine have, which frustrates me,
Warsaw.
and I think this was said by Ms.
You've
Swearer
only even
and
dispensed.
others, is that there are a whole bunch of other attendant problems that are correlative
Oh
of
God,
violence.
poor sheltered thing.
High
You
lead
said illegal to own
poisoning
more than 6
levels,
dollars. I'm not sure if that's a joke or not.
high poverty
In
levels,
some states it might be.
inadequate housing.
I'm just
I
saying
could
there
go
are
on
some
and on and
laws
on
out there that
of issues that I've heard people on the conservative side of the aisle
In
to
Alabama.
the conservative side of the of the
Well,
country
yeah,
to
well,
the,
technically
to
it's
the
legal in
more
Alabama
progressive
on
side
any-
understand that we are not often getting at the root problems
And
that
trust me,
really create environments where
education.
violence
What I don't get
proliferates.
is, like, are they counting?
And so I'm so happy to have this conversation, but I've had
I don't
decades
know,
of
but we gotta
frustration living in my community
You're fucking right.
and seeing evidence-based examples of things that lower violence. Mr. Cook, I wish you and I got to work together when I was mayor, to have you as a prosecutor in my city. I think you and I would have done a lot of good.
Yeah,
In all sincerity.
but yeah,
Because
guys are fucking-
what frustrates the hell out of me is cities like mine have too much of the policing we don't need.
I didn't do that.
Where I watch kids getting arrested for doing things that kids at Yale and Stanford did when I was
Okay.
there.
Yeah.
Now they've
I
got
believe it.
records. Now they can't get jobs because they were arrested on marijuana charges when we have had presidents and senators bragging about their pot usage.
Okay, hold on.
And what that does economically to a city is stunning when you have
shut up. Let's do this. Okay. By now, most of us should know that the war on drugs is actually horse crap. It hasn't solved anything, hasn't fixed anything. And you know that because thousands of more people die by fentanyl every year. Yes. Why are you
Is
tapping
there
on me?
no joke about the 6 dildos in Texas and then it being called a penal code?
There are plenty of jokes there.
You did not
Is it
say
a
that.
double-headed penal code? Is it a single
See?
penal code? Is it a bendy penal code? Is it a small penal code? Is it a big penal code?
That looks
I mean,
familiar.
there are plenty of freaking penal codes out there.
See?
But for Cory Booker and his dumbass, sorry, why I look over at my son while he's singing, whatever. Yeah, look, we had methamphetamine come up in about the 60s, 70s. Methamphetamine was horrible. You had crack come up in the 80s, mid 80s, roll into the 90s, and you had more laws come up after that. You have all these laws that will lock people up for a simple thing that they have on them or that they can choose to consume. But nothing really changed with whether or not they, again, wrongfully deprive someone else of life, liberty, or property. So, in other words, I don't give a shit if you smoke yourself stupid as long as you're supporting your own fucking habit.
That kind of goes with the dildo thing. They're lawfully depriving people of penal shaped objects. They can't do that.
I'm with you.
I'm just saying. I mean, it goes
If
with it.
you want to whittle your whatever out of whatever,
By all
get to
means.
whittling. If you want to put a cement tamper on it, rock and roll with your bad self.
See, now we're fighting the wrong fight. Now we need
If
to
you
start
want
fighting
it
dildos.
so big it can knock out buildings, get with your sister. Sorry, that was a low hanging fruit situation. Let's get. That's a,
mass incarceration for
You
low
guys
level
have- you guys have no idea.
But I do know when we target the small percentage of people in my city
Okay.
who have records of violence, we've been able to have incredible results. That's why I think you and I, if I was mayor and you were my
Give me a
U.S.
link.
attorney, we could have done some good by targeting what the problem is. But then Mr. Cook, you said something else, which stunned me when I became mayor, was how we were able to drive down recidivism rates by having substantive programs that help people come home. First of all, just getting identification or housing and a job drop recidivism rates, not to mention all the other things that we can do, but we can't find funding for those programs.
We don't have patience
to expand them to
drink
scale.
and smoke while we watch this.
Mr. Bryant, if you can just please, we know violence intervention programs work.
My mama told me if you ain't got nothing.
It's not even anymore
I'm gonna let that
there's no debate here.
fly.
Could you just tell me that the funding issue, if we were able to take programs like this to scale, what kind of results do you think we could see?
That's how come I have no bras, because I took my bra off at
Thank you for
Ari's.
the question. I think we could see major results.
Sure.
We have do something in Chicago where we identify, our population in each community, all 77 neighborhoods. In those, top 30 neighborhoods, we're looking at who are the identified people, what do we have currently in terms of funding, and what funding would be necessary for us to get to 75% of the people who are at risk of being a perpetrator or a victim of gun violence. And we're doing all the things that everyone has said here. We're putting social supports around them. We're subsidizing people getting a GED. We're giving people transitional jobs, supporting them through jobs, paying for them to get to and from school to their job without having to pay for it. So we all agree on the things that matter most. And I think the other, some people would say that intact families are important. Well, we got to have intact families that are healthy mentally, financially, and are well housed as well to be an intact family.
And let's this is something I don't think most Americans know. Rural area, urban area, that the cost of a shooting. I went to my hospital, University Hospital in Newark, and just said, how much does a non-fatal gunshot wound cost taxpayers? Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Wow. Not to mention what that trauma does to a family or community. I've seen businesses close just because they've had shootings at them. The ripple effect of one shooting economically, yet we can't come up with the investments in evidence-based programs that are actually working to lower violence. We're being penny wise and pounds foolish in this country. And there's enough bipartisan opportunity here in this
Anytime
we have shown that we can do bipartisan things on actual stuff that works to lower violence for communities that are so suffering from the trauma is incredible. If I can just have for Mr. Whitehouse one last degree of indulgence on a personal level.
Senator Lee, who's entitled to the indulgence here since he's up.
I appreciate that. Well, this is actually about Senator Lee. It's very personal because as much as he's my friend, he doubts me. And so, Mr. Bryant, you're on under oath here. You and I played football together. You were on the wrong side of the ball. Just for Mr. Lee's benefit, am I a former great tight end or the greatest tight end you've ever played?
I bet you he is a great.
Please, for my colleague, just let him know.
I guess at Stanford, I think on our particular team, he would have been the greatest on our team.
Thank you very much. That's for the record, forever in the American Congressional Record.
And I stand, Senator Lee. Yeah, I stand corrected now. I'm never going to doubt you again.
Thank you very much.
After that, we've been arguing about this for years. So thanks for
I think
putting
he's
that
a
to rest,
really
Mr.
good
Bryant.
wide receiver.
Ms. Ware, I'd like to start with you. Tell us a little bit about how many people in the United States every year are using, how many times each year does an American use a firearm in self-defense?
So we don't have an exact number, but
we don't
when
have
you
an
look
exact number
at
because we don't
sort of
want to
the
track that.
conglomerate of studies, they mostly find that
Just prove our
with a couple
narrative.
very limited exceptions that are outliers, somewhere between
let's look at
500,000
our
and several
belly
million times a
buttons
year. And I would note that the most extensive study on this issue, the 2021 National Firearms Survey, further validated some of those earlier studies and came to a conclusion of about 1.6 million. And again, that was the most extensive survey ever conducted of firearms owners.
Okay. What would that tell us about risks associated with putting legal restrictions on the books to the extent that those legal restrictions might impair the ability of the law-abiding to use those for lawful purposes, given that it's normally law-abiding people who are most likely to comply with the new law? What would that do to those people?
Well, so
Headline:
it
Law-abiding
shows us
people
generally that
tend to
it's all
abide
about
by law.
understanding where the risk is. For your ordinary law-abiding
Rest
principled
at
citizen
7.
who is mentally stable and not experiencing extreme stressors, which is most American gun owners at any given point, right? Their biggest benefit is that they can now protect themselves against their biggest, most substantial threat, which is external crime. But I think most people on this panel would agree when you flip that, there are cases, right, where if you are now mentally unstable, if you are experiencing crisis, you statistically might be the bigger threat to yourself, or if you are the one perpetuating crime, right? Well, now you are statistically the threat that needs to be solved. So it's about understanding where that threat is. And again, for your ordinary law-abiding gun owner, that threat is
And
external. It's
when
not
you can take the
internal, and that
majority of
ability
gun
to
violence
possess
in
that
America,
firearm is
gun
actually a net
violence,
benefit
you
to them.
okay,
Again, assuming that they are
and boil
not
that down
leaving
to
guns under their couch cushion for their 6-year-old to find
3
and
to
that sort of thing.
9
That can be
counties
problematic. But in the
in
net,
the
yes,
United
it's a
States.
positive for them.
That's helpful,
We
and that's helpful to a point
already
that
know
one of my colleagues made earlier in the hearing, which is that I think we all want to get to a similar place insofar as we're focused on wanting to protect human life.
We already know.
We want fewer deaths.
We already know.
And
the police in these areas
dangerous things can happen
already
if we
know
assume
the shooters
that
by name.
when we pass a law, it's going to be a net life savings, when that's not necessarily always the case. So when you had the governor of New Mexico issue a public health emergency declaration and put in place this executive order dramatically restricting the ability of law-abiding persons to possess firearms in certain places, that's significant. Now, when you look at the New Mexico case in particular, you've researched that and you found some fascinating information. Is it true that you discovered that in New Mexico, only 0.002% of concealed carry permit holders in New Mexico had their permits revoked for any reason?
So I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but that sounds correct. And it is generally the case when you look at permit revocations in any state, they are minuscule. And that's again for any violation. That doesn't necessarily
for the
mean
most part,
that it was revoked because they used
people,
their weapon
citizens
violently. Sometimes it
go
can be
through
they had a
rigmarole
DUI or
of getting
any
a
sort of
license to
non-weapon
carry
related offense.
are
But
more law-abiding
on the whole,
than
when you
the
look at those numbers,
freaking police.
concealed carry permit holders are amongst, if not the
And they
most
tend to have
law-abiding
less
segment of the
negligent
And yet,
discharges.
Governor Grisham's executive order would have affected them disproportionately. Meanwhile, you've got new research that's been done, and a lot of experts in the field from across the political spectrum and across the country have weighed in on this. Earlier this year, the chief of the DC Police Department, Chief Robert Conti, said, quote, "If we really want to see homicides go down," which I think we've established here, we want to save lives. We really want to see homicides go down. Keep bad guys with guns in jail. He went on to say, quote, "Right now, the average homicide suspect has been arrested 11 times prior to them committing a homicide." In 2021, there was a study commissioned by the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform that found gun violence in DC to be tightly concentrated on a very small number of high-risk individuals. In fact, they estimate that within a year, there are 500 identifiable people considered to be very high risk, and these very high-risk individuals comprise 60 to 70% of all gun violence in the district. So there again, we have the problem. If what we focus on is rules that are going to be new rules, separate and apart from the dozens
Good deal,
of
Ron.
laws that have normally been broken.
Yeah, man.
The minute
Carry
someone
everywhere
commits
you can
a
possibly
gun crime,
carry.
the minute someone
If you're
kills
not
another
going
human
to a
being with a
metal
gun,
detector where someone will
by
take your
adding
firearm from,
another gun law, a gun law of much wider applicability,
little
and if
gun
what we're
free
doing
zone
is
stickers
restricting and restraining
don't
the
even matter.
rights of the law-abiding and hence their ability to defend themselves, will that necessarily save lives?
No, Senator, and that's actually one of the things that I'm talking about in my testimony when I referenced this idea of a lot of our commonly proposed gun control laws. They're not actually designed to get at any of the underlying factors. So if you just tag on another law, whatever it is, okay, now it's a universal background check or a magazine capacity restriction. The people who were already illegally possessing those firearms to commit illegal crimes are not going to suddenly say, oh, it's what's triply illegal, so now I won't
Yeah.
do it.
Why does
All
it
you're doing
matter
is
how many
expanding
rounds
the likelihood
that
that
I
an
carry?
otherwise ordinary peaceable citizen
Why?
is going to get
I'm no
caught up in
threat
sort
to
of a
anybody
tic-tac offense, or even
unless you
worse,
suddenly
it
become
could
a threat to me
actually
and my
undermine their ability to defend themselves in the most acute
on the
sort of
table.
self-defense scenarios.
And of the 250,000 gun criminals incarcerated, surveyed, only 1% of them bought them from a retail source. The rest of them bought them through some underground
Some pizza.
illegal avenue or on the street or something like that. So we got to be very careful. Let's not punish the law-abiding and thereby restrict their ability to protect themselves. That will cost lives, not save them.
I'm not reaching for it.
I told Senator Tillis that he could have my spot because I was going to be here for a while Chairman Durbin was off from voting. So I'll recognize Senator Tillis and I'll take the next Democratic spot that lines up.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. Thank you all for being here. I, along with Senator Cornyn, joined with Senator Sinema and Senator Murphy to negotiate the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Stand by it. I think it's policy that's going to age well. Just for an update, full implementation was January of last year. There have been 168,971 purchase transactions for under 21 since then. 1,200 were denied, not based on the Safer Communities Act, but based on a prior policy. 428 were denied based on the Safer Communities Act. So to the Second Amendment advocates who said this was going to lead to a mass confiscation,
I heard that,
patently wrong. More importantly, if they see the basis for the 400 or so that were rejected under the Safer Communities Act, no reasonable person would think that that was their day to buy a gun. So I would really encourage people to take a look at this bill, but not just look at the gun safety or the next processing. Take a look at school hardening. Take a look at investment in mental health. Take a look at a generational opportunity to address what I believe is the root cause behind many of these mass shootings. And quite honestly, many of the deaths related to guns. Take a look at the number of suicides that are committed through a gun that was legally purchased. It's a behavioral health challenge that we need to look at. I supported the bipartisan effort because I thought the policy was going to be good policy and age well. What I don't like are people that are making it harder to get people back to the table to get something done.
Too much ammo.
And you don't get anything done on gun violence around here without bipartisan cooperation, which is why I was very frustrated with President Biden on the day that he signed the Safer Communities Act. One of the reasons I didn't go to that signing is I fully expected he was going to use it to spike the football and talk about more than he needs to get done, that he knows damn well doesn't have bipartisan support. That is at the expense of areas where we can work together. Similarly, Governor Grisham, you want to push us further back from coming up with reasonable policy, pass or implement an executive order that's patently unconstitutional. That takes people away from the table. Doesn't solve the
DJ,
problem.
what's up, brother?
Now let's talk about let's talk about violence in our communities. And I won't have time, but I would like to go back and ask states, conservative and liberal states, help us help your communities. Get right with providing information to the next processors so that they have the best available information about the backgrounds of these. If you're a Second Amendment advocate, you should be providing information to the next processing center so those under 21s can get their guns sooner. If you're a gun control advocate, you should, and incidentally, Senator Booker, New Jersey's among one of the worst offenders of providing background information that we need to actually process and identify people who are at risk. It has to do with behavioral health adjudications and juvenile criminal arrest records. We've got to get this implementation right. But we've also got to look at the mental health and other components on the bill. I promised myself I wasn't going to take most of my time on it, but here I go. It's an important bill. People need to understand it. Instead of looking past it to the next thing we should do here, which is oftentimes dividing us, every single senator should understand that bill and do what I do, is have meeting after meeting after meeting in our state to make North Carolina the best implementation of the Safer Communities Act, and hopefully other states will follow. Now I got to get to the broken window theory.
Voting rights,
I believe that we're going through it. I believe I'm living it at Eastern Market.
Every single one.
I bought a condo there about 5 years ago, felt good for about 3 years. Now I promised my wife after Votorama, or when we get out of here at midnight, I will not walk home. It's a 15-minute walk that now feels different. And it's because local mayors and town councils have lost sight of the fact that I believe the broken window theory is real. And I believe where we proved it, someone who's up for nomination in Baltimore, former Baltimore mayor, over 50% African-American population, elected a white mayor in the form of Martin O'Malley because they were fed up with what they were experiencing in Baltimore. And by stepping up, he reduced crime, and you could debate the number, but by about 30%, as much as 42%. And it wasn't because he was letting people get a pass on jaywalking or anything else. He was holding people responsible and drawing the margins around what was acceptable behavior. Mr. Cook, do you believe in the broken window theory? Ms. Shear, or swear to you?
Yeah, dude, you're right. Look, there are a lot of these criminals that
I
are
believe it is one of a number of theories that is helpful to understanding crime.
I firmly believe
and
that the resurgence of crime that we're seeing, the feeling that I have now in Washington, D.C., has more to do with people mixing up Dr. Cozy Gay. I believe that people deserve forgiveness. You are a lot further along in your faith journey than I am in forgiving mass murderers and a number of other people, but good on you for being
their rights.
But hopefully we can both agree that these mass murderers need to redeem themselves while they spend the rest of their lives in prison when we're talking about those sorts of offenses.
No sense to me whatsoever.
But until we start recognizing that our communities are less safe, governor's orders taking away guns like New Mexico are forcing more people to buy guns. Gun ownership is at an all-time high now, and it's going to get higher if you keep doing this kind of crap, Governor from New Mexico. We need people to sit around the table and act like adults, go back and have unpleasant conversations with people that are in our parties, but get to the table and solve problems, and we're not going to do it by talking about take all the guns away or give them all guns. And we're not going to do it by making any of this increase in crime and reduction in safety in these communities excusable. Whether it's Chicago, Charlotte, New York, Portland, doesn't matter. We all know what safe feels like, and you can't tell me you can walk the streets of San Francisco at night now and feel safe. Local electeds, state electeds, everybody else need to recognize they have a responsibility to the people of those communities to make them safer, and they are going in the wrong direction now. And gun violence is only one piece of the puzzle.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are at yet another hearing called by Democrats on gun control.
That's like fucking mad genius.
Understand that today's Democrats in the Senate, these are not your father's Democrats. There are no moderate Democrats left
That's like
in
mad
Congress.
genius.
Today's Democrats, when it comes to guns, their objective is to disarm law-abiding
No,
citizens.
that is somebody who's at well in tight.
They simultaneously embrace policies
You can't even tell me
that release violent criminals from jail.
places. You can't even tell me when.
They're not interested in locking up murderers. They're not interested in locking up gangbangers. They're not interested in locking up violent criminals. Instead, they systematically support policies that release violent criminals. By the way, if you are hesitant to believe me when I say this, perhaps you'll believe the mayor of Dallas. The mayor of Dallas, Eric Johnson, who's a friend.
And this is where
He's a lifelong Democrat. He's African-American mayor, elected in Dallas, been a Democrat his whole life until just recently. He left the Democrat Party and became a Republican. Now, let me read you why Mayor Johnson became a Republican. Quote, "Unfortunately, many of our cities are in disarray. Mayors and other local elected officials have failed to make public safety a priority or to exercise fiscal restraint. Most of these local leaders are proud Democrats who view cities as laboratories for liberalism rather than as havens for opportunity and free enterprise. Too often, local tax dollars are spent on policies that exacerbate homelessness, coddle criminals, and make it harder for ordinary people to make a living. And too many local Democrats insist on virtue signal, proposing half-baked government programs that aim to solve every single societal ill and on finding new ways to thumb their noses at Republicans at the state and federal level. I have to say to an ordinary person. The political ideology of today's Democrats makes no sense. Why your priority is disarming a law-abiding citizen, but not going after the violent criminal. And to be clear, it is the radical left that advocates abolishing the police and defunding the police. And when I say there are no moderate Democrats left, the Biden administration has nominated not one, not two, but three of the leading advocates of abolishing the police.
Okay, so this is one of those things that I go after a lot. Is the person having the gun isn't the issue. It's not. Plenty of people have guns, carry guns. I carry everywhere. I'm not going through a metal detector, but I'm not a threat to anybody. If you want to drill down on so-called gun violence, then you drill down on people who are, in fact, using firearms in a violent manner. And I'm not talking about someone threatens me, I pull my gun, I shoot them. You know, that is a violent interaction, but I'm not purposely using that gun to inflict violence on another for no reason. There is a set of circumstances to where I have to adjust my life to pulling that firearm and then engaging a target. So there are things that happen that I have to respond to. The vast majority of your gun violence that these dickheads are talking about is a lot of gang violence, to where someone merely has to wear the wrong color and I feel like I get to launch rounds in their direction and possibly harm. Okay, so my connection decided to die again. I had to give it mouth. But it's not a situation to where I just decide to use my gun for no other reason, but I want to use it. The vast majority of people using firearms is them using firearms to defend themselves against aggression. And these idiots who have their own private security, who have 24/7 people waiting on them, hand on foot, to protect their lives, they don't understand that. I was talking to a group of my guys the other day, and I've carried pretty solid for the last couple of years. And I will tell them in a hurry, I am a whole lot more polite when I carry than when there are certain circumstances right now where I'm in a position where I can't carry. I am a whole lot more polite when I carry than when I don't. Simple. Anytime I'm carrying, which is the vast majority of the time, if a fight breaks out, no matter what, I'm bringing a gun to the fight. So I smart off to someone, they knock my block off. They knock me out. And then they search me. Well, my gun is there. So they could do me, or they could hold back and they could do someone else with that firearm. So again, since I carry all the time, and especially when I carry, I'm a lot more polite. I tend to back off the situations a lot quicker. I'm not near as in your face because I know that there's going to be a gun involved in that fight. Let me let this play because
He's to senior positions at the U.S. Department of Justice.
Get his talking points.
Every single Democrat on this committee
That's all it is.
voted to confirm
Talking.
every single one of them, but not just on
Did you
this
hang up
committee.
on?
Every single Democrat in the United States Senate
Your phone went off,
They did.
voted to confirm all three
and you hung up
of the
on.
Biden nominees, including Rachel Rollins, nominated by the U.S. Attorney in Massachusetts, one of the leading advocates of abolishing the police as a local prosecutor.
My girl.
She put out a list of violent crimes that she wouldn't prosecute.
But she's my wife. I don't see.
Answer the phone.
You know what? We're not having a hearing
Oh, she isn't.
on the impact of Soros prosecutors releasing violent criminals from jail. We're not having a hearing on carjacking in Washington, D.C. because the Democrat City Council lowered the penalty for carjacking, lowered the penalty for murder. We're not having a hearing on Congressman Henry Cuellar, a Democrat from Texas, who was carjacked in Washington, D.C. at 9:30 at night. We're also not having a hearing on the Antifa and Black Lives Matter riots across the country because to Democrats, when stores are being looted, when police cars are being firebombed, when police officers are being murdered, that's not a crisis if they agree with the ideology of the criminals. Instead, their objective is they want to take away the firearm from the single mom who's taking the subway home at night,
Like he gives a shit about them.
who that is the only prevention she has against the violent criminals that the Democrats are unleashing. And by the way, to give you an underscoring of it, look,
Ted Cruz doesn't give
we have a mental health crisis in this country.
ass about any of that.
I've repeatedly introduced legislation to improve school safety, to invest to double the number of police officers in schools. Democrats objected. To invest $15 billion in mental health counselors in schools. Democrats objected. Their priority is not stopping the criminals. Their priority is disarming law-abiding citizens. And by the way, they call it a public health crisis because they want to put supposed experts in charge of disarming you. The Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights is not a public health crisis. What is a public health crisis is the crime rates that are skyrocketing because Democrats keep letting murderers and violent criminals out of jail. But Dr. Rainey, let me ask you a question in terms of public health. Right now today, what's the leading cause of death for Americans age 18 to 45?
I believe that it's opioids.
It is drug overdoses. Last year, more than 100,000 Americans died of drug overdoses. 70% of that came from Chinese fentanyl that is flooding across our southern border because this administration has opened up our southern border to 8.6 million illegal immigrants, has enriched the drug traffickers. Do you think, Dr. Rainey, that fentanyl flooding across our open border on the south that has killed collectively 100,000 overdoses last year, do you think that's a public health crisis?
Absolutely. Synthetic fentanyl is a major crisis, and Senator Reid from my home state of Rhode Island has been a leader in trying to stop the supply of synthetic fentanyl.
Except he hasn't, because Senator Reid, along with every other Democrat, supports Joe Biden's open borders, because when we try to secure the borders, they block it over and over and over again. And the criminals who come across who are taking people's lives, that is because the Democrats refuse to enforce the law.
Senator Cruz, equally important is harm reduction to ensure that those who use opioids have access to things like Suboxone or buprenorphine and methadone to help so that they don't use illicit substances off the street. Thank you.
They're like the Globetrotters beating up on the, who was it?
Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks very much. Let me
The
welcome
Globetrotters.
Dr. Randy back here.
freaking Beat up on the Nationals,
work
whoever it
in
was.
Rhode Island.
Let's put this whole thing. It's all
Dr. Randy, did you have occasion in the emergency rooms of Rhode Island to treat gunshot patients?
I did.
And did you have occasion to observe the difference between gunshot injuries from what you might call regular ammunition versus gunshot injuries from essentially weapons of war, where the projectile, the bullet, travels at particularly high speed as it hits the human body?
It's difficult to know in the emergency department what type of ammunition is used. We have seen an increasing number of patients with multiple gunshot wounds at once, which is obviously much more difficult to save.
What are the, what is the,
Okay, let me help you out here, Sheldon, because you're an absolute moron. Size of projectile doesn't matter. Speed of projectile, in a lot of cases, doesn't matter. The design of the projectile, whether it's hollow point, whether it's a, oh God, baby, help me out.
I wasn't listening. What now?
Design of projectile, hollow point, full metal jacket, semi-hollow point, wad cutter, yada yada. Okay, ball ammo. Yeah, those are things that work into the lethality of a projectile.
Steel jacketed, copper jacketed, lead.
223, 556.
Trash cartridges.
Yes, trash cartridges. You can't hunt big game with them because they will not reliably take down animals like white-tailed deer. And for those of us down here, white-tailed deer are anywhere from what, 50 pounds to 150 pounds, somewhere around there. That's a bunch of big deer for our area. What makes a projectile more or less lethal, like all of us know, is whether or not that projectile will distort, whether it will cavitate, whether it will tumble, you name it. But they're focusing on 5.56 or 2.23 like it is absolutely just most dangerous thing on this planet, and no, it's not. Especially when you start shortening barrel lengths. When you start getting into 10.5, my AR pistol, it is not going to be good after so many yards. It's not a 300-yard gun. It's 10.5. It is up in your face. That's the way that gun rolls. My 12.5 AK, 30 caliber round. It is in your face. It is made to be up close and nasty and personal. That's the way that gun is designed. There's so many things that work into the lethality of a system, whether it's the gun, the caliber, powder, you name it. All those things work into whether something is more or less lethal. It's been that way since the Geneva Convention. It's why Germans had arguments over shotguns being used in trenches by Americans, because Americans use shotguns to devastating effect in trenches, and Germans and others decided, oh wait, we don't want to take that ass whooping. We're going to bring that to the Geneva Convention, and no, you can't use these certain things at certain times. And what can I say? It's
experience like of the ambulance pulling up into the bay and somebody coming into your hands with gunshot wounds, particularly multiple gunshot wounds, and perhaps, if you can identify it, even high-speed projectile AR-15 type gunshot wounds.
So when we get an alert from EMS that they're coming in with a gunshot wound, which we often but not always do, we...
What the did he just say? High-speed projectile AR-15...
mobilize not just emergency physicians, but also trauma surgeons, social workers, medical students, respiratory therapists, and so on. So there's radiology techs. There's somewhere between 15 and 20 folks who go into a room. We mobilize blood supplies in order to have that at the ready. Bring a lot of different equipment ranging from chest tubes to
So, Barton, here's the thing. Okay, I have a Remington 700 I've hunted with for a couple of years now. Shooting 30-06. It knocks deers down to the ground. Have I seen deer walk away catching that shot? Yes, I have. I shot a doe 3 fucking times last weekend with a 30-06. And until the third shot, she walked away like nothing happened. I mean, like nothing happened. Like she was just going to walk away and keep feeding kind of happened.
I thought you shot her twice.
3 times. I shot her the first time, and I knew I pulled the shot. This is me and the wife talking. I knew I pulled the shot, and I pulled the shot low and hit her in the breastbone and just clipped her breastbone, split her open. She ran about 40 yards, and I put the second shot right in her shoulder. Pow! She should have dropped dead as a bag of hammers right there. And then she started to walk away like nothing ever happened. And I shot her the third time, and then she finally stopped. The 2 holes in her shoulder that took out her heart, took out her lungs, was less than a ½ inch apart. But she was just
shock and adrenaline.
Yeah, it's that first shot, the adrenaline probably sped up so fast. Pow, that the second 2, she didn't feel anything. But still, that's a doe shot. And when I gutted her, the complete top of her heart and the top of her lungs was jello, but she was walking away like nothing happened. Because I wouldn't have put another round in her. I knew the first shot dropped. I knew it. I felt it when I pulled the trigger. I felt the gun dip down. And I was like, oh, shit. Okay. The third shot, I wouldn't even have taken if she hadn't been walking around like nothing happened to her. And she was just walking around looking like she was going to go back to feeding. So, yeah, crazy times.
The tools that we use to crack a chest if needed, and have these standard algorithms that we follow as we take care of a patient. Sometimes those are successful. Often they are not. The likelihood of saving someone's life depends on both where they are shot and how many times they are shot. I have seen, again, although I cannot identify types of ammunition or types of firearms in the emergency department, that's not my training, and we don't know that at the time. I have seen organs shredded, aortas bisected, and obviously have seen folks with gunshots to the brain as well.
And the people you
suffice it
saw
to say that
shots from the brain was 15 years ago.
knife wounds
treated one dude
and beating injuries are customarily easier to treat than gunshot wounds, and particularly multiple gunshot wounds.
That is correct. I'll also say that another senator made a point about suicide. Most suicide attempts we can also save. Suicide attempts by a firearm are almost universally lethal.
Yes.
And
because
not
a
to belabor the
suicide
point too
attempt
much,
by
but
firearm
have you ever
extremely
witnessed
violent event?
Multiple injuries by musket, which was the firearm of choice
fucking God.
At the time the Second Amendment was drafted.
I don't know that I've
When
ever
were
seen a
muskets last issued to soldiers?
And I think
when were
the founders
muskets
may well have
the
had enough
last
common sense to understand that in the
technological
time it takes to
advancement
reload
of
a musket,
firearms?
if somebody were going berserk in a tavern or at a musical performance, there'd be plenty of time to intervene, and that something categorically different takes place when an individual has access to weapons that either are or can be configured to fire rapid fire and to
Because
fire
no one
ammunition of
back
an entirely
then owned
different
fully
and
functional
more
warship.
destructive nature because of the speed with which the
Cannons,
projectile flies.
mortars.
So thank you for being here.
Close contact.
So sorry we lost you to our Connecticut neighbors. But thank you for your service in Rhode Island, and I'm glad you still tell everybody that you're a Rhode Islander.
Still my home address, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. Well, I'd like to say a word to particularly those at the witness table, but especially those with white coats. Now you've seen it. You've seen the debate. With a colleague, you think, what are those politicians thinking? Why don't they take a look at what we're seeing every single day in virtually every hospital across America? And why don't they do something? Well, there are 2 or 3 different approaches, as you probably noted and listened to the senators ask their questions. I can recall one approach. I was a member of the House. It was almost 30 years ago. It's a long time. 30 years ago, and along came a new narcotic called crack cocaine. It scared the hell out of us. It was a form of cocaine, but it was a form that was dirt cheap, highly addictive, and devastating to pregnant women carrying babies. We decided to do something. We passed the drug bill. What we did was this. We got tough. I mean, really tough. We increased the penalty for crack cocaine over powder cocaine by 100 to 1. 100 to 1. What you could hold in your hand could put you in prison for the rest of your life. And that was our answer to it, to finally put an end to it. Well, what happened? System over powdered cocaine, but we were getting tough, really tough. Finally, under President Donald Trump, I mean that, under President Donald Trump, he signed a bipartisan bill that Senator Grassley and I co-sponsored called the First Step Act, which basically says to take away the mandatory minimum aspects of some of these provisions relating to narcotics. So this debate's been going on as long as I've been in Congress. We've learned and we've forgotten, and we've learned again and forgotten again. And that's what we face today. To think that people don't recognize what guns are doing to America, it's just amazing.
Guns aren't doing anything to America.
When that fella got
Americans
up
are doing
in
things
Highland
to
Park,
America.
Illinois, in 60 seconds, he fired off 83 rounds. 83 rounds from a military assault weapon. Tell me, that the
Military
average
assault
American
weapon.
needs a military assault
Wait till they
to protect
wait
themselves
till
and their
someone
families.
takes a
I
Remington
don't buy it.
700
I
bone
just don't
stock
buy it. Whatever
like
my view
mine
of the Second
that
Amendment,
I hunt
it
with
didn't include anything
every year,
envisioned by our founding fathers. that
and
looked
they
like an
sit
assault
back and they start
So the
tapping
question is,
people
will we
out.
do anything as a result of this hearings? Some of you as witnesses have expressed a weariness that we keep returning to this topic. It is intentional. It's not accidental. I'm coming back to this topic as long as it is a threat to America, and it's certainly a threat.
Yeah.
My special guest from Chicago, thank you for coming. Thanks for what you do with your
Got you.
lives.
Go on.
You don't give up on people, and that really makes a difference. You're turning lives around. We've got to do more of it. So at this
Turning
point,
lives
we've learned that
around.
hospital and community-based
My
violence
ass.
programs, violence prevention programs, partnerships with law-abiding gun owners, and more, all steps that can prevent firearm injuries and deaths. It bears repeating that we're going to continue to tackle this topic because that is why we were sent here. That is the province and responsibility of the Senate Judiciary Committee. The hearing record is going to remain open for 1 week for
The
submission
Senate
of materials to the
Judiciary
record.
Committee shouldn't
With
be
that, the
involved
Senate Judiciary Committee
whatsoever in firearms ownership at all, not from the word go. but here they are, and this is the end of the hearing, I guess, for today. And what do? They blame a bunch of emotional, illiterate people committing crimes, killing people with firearms, and they throw the rest of us in with them, saying that we're just as guilty as them because we believe in firearms ownership. What they? All right. We're fixing to go nights and all that. All right, so I guess I'm back. So anyway, I'm gonna end this one here. It was an interesting watch today to see where things are still pushing, and they're still pushing towards this whole community health, gun violence is this great community deal, whole 9 yards. I'm tired of a lot of it, to say the least, because it's all bullshit. Because you and I, you guys that follow me, you guys that have watched me, you guys that have your own things going on, you guys already know you carry guns every day. You're not a threat to anybody. I'm not a threat to anybody. As long as you're not a threat to my family, I've got no issues with you whatsoever. So it doesn't matter whether I have my gun on me or not. It's never going to be used against you. My students, same thing. So anyway, I'm going to let this go now. You guys take it easy. You perps be cool. You guys keep that thing on you at all times. Dark should be on. Tactical Turkey should be rolling right now. Hopefully I'll catch some of that. Other than that, I'm going to take a shower and go chill out. So I love you guys. You guys take it easy. Keep that thing on you at all times. And hey, remember, government wants you dead or in prison. One of the two. So you guys be cool. I'm out.